As chair of the SAU 21 Joint School Board, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and in accordance with the governor's emergency order number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please note that there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to the meeting, which was authorized pursuant to the governor's emergency order. However, in accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that we are providing public access to the meeting by telephone with additional access possibilities by video or other electronic means. We're utilizing Zoom for this electronic meeting. All members of the SAU 21 Joint School Board have the ability to communicate contemporaneously during this meeting through this platform, and the public has access to contemporaneously listen and, if necessary, participate in this meeting through dialing the following phone number: 646-876-9923, or by clicking on the website which was listed on the agenda. We previously gave notice to the public of the necessary information for accessing the meeting, including how to access the meeting using Zoom or telephonically. Instructions have also been provided on the website of the SAU 21 office at www.sau21.org. If anyone has a problem, please call 603-926-8992, extension 103, or email at revans@sau21.org. In the event that the public is unable to access the meeting will be adjourned and rescheduled. Please note that all votes that are taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. Let's start the meeting by taking a roll call attendance. When each member states their presence, please also state whether there is anyone in the room with you during this meeting, which is required under the right to know law.
I'm sorry, I was bringing another board member in who was calling in via phone. So I think I have him in here. Tony, is that you? He emailed me. I believe he's in here now. Tony, are you with us? I'll do the roll call. Stanton?
Yes, present. Family members in and out.
Forrest Carter?
Present, and I'm alone.
Greg Narrow?
I am here and in one of my secret rooms that nobody has access to.
Greg Parrish?
Present, family in and out.
Greg Duffy? Henry Marsh? Henry, are you still here?
You might
He's
be muted.
Henry?
Here, alone.
Yes. Jessica Brown? Jim Kime?
I'm here and by myself.
John Bailey?
Here with family in and out.
Leslie LaFond?
Here alone.
Mike Rabideau?
Here, one dog.
Rebecca Burdick?
Here, family in and out.
Sharon Gordon?
Here, family in and out.
Tom Von Jess?
Present, alone.
Heidi Terracina?
Here with potential family in and out.
Jason Farias? Jennifer Hubbard?
Here with family.
Kelly Huber? Kelly, I'm going to unmute you.
Family in and out.
Okay. Martin Tavishian?
Present and alone.
Nermina Peterson?
Present, alone.
Tony Delano?
Present with family.
And Jill Swayze?
Present, family maybe in and out.
Okay. I have the roll call.
Great, thank you. Bill, do you want to
get started?
Yeah, get it started.
I can do that. So let me share my screen and get set up here. And move this. And put that in present mode. Look at the skills I've learned in a week. So we have a lengthy presentation because this is a very detailed set of issues, and it's an evolving set of factors. And so I think the one thing that we're sure of is that the information that we have with as of yesterday, I think 5 weeks through to return to school, as we set up in the calendar when last we met, we know that factors are going to continue to change on us, and I'm sorry about that, but I want to be very honest and say that we know that that's going to happen, and I think we've tried to do a really detailed job here of explaining to you why. And I also want to say a word that over the last couple of weeks we've been very fortunate to work with a couple of the regional physicians in our community who live in our communities, who've been terrific in giving their time and helping us with a number of issues. And I think you'll see some of our conversations with them reflected. They've offered to help in other ways, and we're going to continue to rely on them. One of them actually an infectious disease physician who again lives in one of our communities. So I just want to thank them. And so I'm going to switch this off and on with people from time to time. And if you've ever presented using this, that I can no longer see all of you. And so this is going to be a little clunky at times, and I apologize for that. So let's get started. So I think one of the things we want to start out by saying is that we've tried to look at this plan in terms of each of our schools, not only collectively when it's appropriate, but individually when necessary. And you're going to certainly see that in the recommendations tonight. But I think you're also going to see it in some of the data that we're able to share with you, and some of the conversations that we've been having over the last few weeks. So we try whenever possible to do things as an SAU. There are some issues here, some opportunities that we had that are available in some schools that are not available to us in others as we've done that planning. So from the beginning, our goal has been to have all students and teachers safely back in our school buildings, for teaching and learning 5 days a week for a full school year. What's become really apparent is that that's a very difficult goal to achieve in a pandemic. And I hope that this presentation lays out in a great deal of detail for you tonight what some of those issues are. So I want to start with the task force, which has met 6 times since mid-May till through to July 23rd, and all of the working groups. We've had people on the task force, and when you have a copy of this, you'll be able to click on and see names and all those kinds of things, but representing most of, if not all of the significant parts of our SAU, including school board members, nurses, principals, teachers, crisis response, our unions, facilities, parents, and even SAU 90. And we had working groups in addition to that, that really put together much of the detail of specific recommendations that came to the task force. And you're going to see a great deal of their work in this work tonight. They met regularly and made recommendations to the task force, and they looked at crisis response, return to instruction, post-secondary response, technology, and operations. And I just want to say, because I don't get to say it often enough, Caroline Arakilian, David Hobbs, Matt Ferrara, Jason Saltmarsh, Donna Couture, who chaired those committees, have been amazing partners in all of this work, meeting at all kinds of times. Donna actually is responsible at the end of the day for the finished product you're looking at, and she stayed up way too late to do that. And I just can't tell you how much I appreciate all of them. They're wonderful to work with, and in particular to have worked with on this very difficult project to date because there's a lot of work to be done yet. Our overarching values for all the decisions and recommendations made within this plan, we're starting with safety to make sure that whatever we put in place, we are comfortable that we've taken the utmost safety measures to protect students, families, and employees while providing them with quality learning experience. Equity, something we struggled with that I sometimes think that some districts, the Department of Education doesn't spend near enough time on. We struggled mightily through the crisis remote learning part of this work with making sure that kids had quality access to actually ascertain the instruction, the face-to-face meetings, the live meetings, excuse me, that were being scheduled for them, and it continues to be a top concern for us. Wellness, to make sure that we are supportive of student and staff mental health and wellness needs given the traumatic experience we've been through and continue to work in. And teaching and learning, making sure that our students have an opportunity to access the curriculum, to make sure they have access to quality instruction, to make sure they have access to live interactions with their teachers as soon as possible and as much as possible. So those are really the guiding principles that went into all of this, and I hope you see them in what we're going to talk about tonight. We've relied on a number of data sources. You know, I've been one that has said about the New Hampshire grade K-12 back to school guidance that it was, and many of you I know have looked at it, it was exceptionally general. It really put the ball back in individual school districts' hands, which on one level we applaud, and on other levels caused some of the differences, the significant differences that you're seeing between SAUs and school districts, which has caused us some problems, and certainly caused many of our employees some problems. We've paid close attention to documents that have been published by the CDC, the American Association of Pediatrics, Harvard School of Public Health, and DHHS. And again, as an example, our nurses are meeting weekly with Dr. Chan from DHHS. He actually met with superintendents as recently as Monday. And so those sessions have been very, very helpful. Staff surveys and parent guardian surveys, which we're going to talk some about here at the beginning of this presentation, and community conversations. I am very proud that we have engaged with the community on so many occasions since the beginning of March. You know, I don't think we need to compare to others, but I'll just say I am exceptionally proud of the level of work that we've put into trying to answer questions for our employees, trying to answer questions for our parents, and engaging them in conversations at the beginning of this for I forget how many weeks on every Saturday morning, and since a number of times to talk about this planning effort. And so in terms of these surveys, we've done a number of surveys. We first conducted a staff survey in late June and early July. We had 423 responses from across our employee groups, and we were asking mainly about the willingness of employees to return to work, and as you're going to see in a minute, the importance of consistency of model between SAU 21 and the school districts where employees live. And I'll say here as kind of a tip-off, particularly in instances where our employees had young children, that you're going to see that that was an exceptionally important factor for them. Oops, there I didn't do something right. Oh, there's parent. Okay, so parent guardian surveys, we've actually done 2. The first survey was done at the same time as that staff survey. We had 837 responses, which represented 1,266 of our students. We have about 2,400 students in total. That survey focused on many of the same issues as the staff survey, the willingness of parents and guardians to send their children back to school, whether we should continue to examine a hybrid model, and whether students returning to schools would use our transportation. We did a second survey that ended very recently. We received 1,565 individual separate student responses to that survey. And the second survey really dealt with their preference, parent preference between two possible models that we were trying to explore. And I'm going to explain a little bit more about those in a second, the in-person and remote. And let me stop here and say something I should have said at the beginning, and that is when this meeting ends, this presentation will be posted to our website. So you'll have access to it. Anyone will have access to it who wants to see it. So here's a piece of the staff survey that I want to show you because it's an important issue in our conversations. So this is the question to your left. It's the question about, is it important to you that that school districts in our region where our employees live are looking at doing something that's consistent among those? And we were struck early on by that 38% who said it was very important, because we thought that matched up with really people, and particularly elementary age children. And 38% is a significant portion of our employee population. We also asked a question of parents who reported to us that they had children at Winnicott and in the Hampton School District, if it was important that the models were, and school calendars are substantially the same. And you can see that the people who had children at Winnicott and in the elementary system said it was very important to them. And I just want to say that, you know, we've worked to try to do that, and that's not proven to be possible in some ways. And I wish it were more. I wish it had happened with more consistency. In terms of, we knew early on in those surveys that this particular set of numbers could be a challenge for us as we continue to look at data. So you'll see on the left that for SAU employees, and I'm focused in on that 20% who said, I would not want to return to school in the fall. And another 45% said I might want to return. But that 20% does not compare well to the 10% of our SAU families who at that time, and again, that's weeks ago. We've stopped talking sometimes about a survey from late June as being recent, because in the way things are evolving, it really isn't terribly recent. And you'll see that in some of the data that we collected here. But 10% said I would not send my child to school in the fall, compared to 20% of our employees. And we said, well, that's something to keep an eye on. So now we're going to look at some data from the second survey, and that's entirely a parent-guardian survey. And so we asked specifically, are you interested in an in-person model? Are you interested in the remote learning academy? Again, in as much as we were able to provide some detail as to what that would look like. And might you be interested in the remote learning academy but need more information? And no surprise, we tried to provide some information. We didn't have a complete model for that. And so I think some people found that frustrating. I think some people said, what happened to hybrid? And so many people probably checked option 3 who had one of those responses. And we are looking at those comments that came in with it. But just in terms of an overall, you'll see that 67% of those 1,565 student responses made by their parents said they were interested in in-person learning. 14% said they were interested in the remote learning academy, and 19% said they might be interested in that remote learning academy. And those two represent fully a third of our students. Again, the students who answered, again, 1,565 out of 2,400. So we also wanted to show you what those numbers looked like by school, because there are some interesting differences. So you'll see at Barnard, where we got 68 responses, but I think we have 84 students, so that's a high response. Only 50% indicated the in-person, and another 50% indicated some interest or interest in the remote model. At Lincoln Ackerman, very different than Barnard in that it was only 8% interested in the remote learning academy model, with another 21% who might be, but that 8% was much lower than we saw in some of the other districts. At Northampton, 12% looks a little bit more like the rest of the SAU. Seabrook, a much higher response in the remote option. and that's the, I'm sorry, that's the elementary, and middle school much the same. Again, much higher in the 20% or more. Again, the numbers of responses were down a little bit in these districts compared to some of the other districts. And then in 9 to 12 at the high school, 70% interested in in-person and about 30% finding themselves in one of those other categories. So somewhat helpful because of something I was left to explain a number of times later. Maybe we didn't do as good a job of explaining in the original correspondence, but so our second parent guardian survey asked for a choice between in-person and remote learning. We were looking at in-person at that time as 5 days a week for a full day. Our goal in doing that was to ascertain if we had enough space to bring all of our students expressing a preference for the in-person model back to school within the safety precautions that would need to be put in place on a school by school and within grade span basis. And that is very important. Again, our goal up front, everybody back in school full day, full 5 days. What we were trying to ascertain here is, do we have the level of response to an in-person model, which can't be 100%. It won't work within social distancing, the kinds of things that you're probably reading about that we need to put in place. So that wouldn't work. So we were trying to see, could we find our way to be able to do that? In addition, we've continued to gauge our employee data, particularly with respect to teachers, educational associates, and substitute teachers. And I'm just going to hold on that point for a minute until a little later when I'm going to walk you through exactly what I mean by that. But our employee data, off of that earlier slide and earlier discussion about, people and their concerns about coming back to work, people and the potential for childcare issues of their own, is a very important factor. And this is one of the more important things, I think, in our presentation tonight. All of these factors and many others with regard to safety measures that you're going to see later on must align in order for us to offer models that can be implemented safely and successfully. I'd love to tell you here that we want to give parents exactly what they indicated in the survey, but if all of these things don't align, I can't. I can't safely do that. And so it's really been an experience of trying to look at all of these data, all of these factors, and make the best recommendations given what's in front of us. And by the way, we're going to, if it's okay, I'm going to go through this and then we'll take questions at the end. So this slide's, again, very important. Complications in our planning. So the evolving nature of the pandemic, and I'm quoting here a colleague who I won't name, who said in a recent communication with parents and staff, a lot can change in 5 weeks. We have seen districts around us who started off with a plan, and in terms of early discussions with all of us in our Southeasters group, and who have now evolved to something very, very different than what they originally set out to do because of data like we're looking at here. And/or we know that in the next 5 weeks, some aspects of our plan and certainly some aspects of their plans, which all impact us, will change. So a lot can change and will change in 5 weeks. Oops. The shifting nature of the guidance and the perception that some of those guiding documents are being governed by convenience rather than science. So let me give you an example. We have an order in New Hampshire that says that if you leave New England, when you return to New Hampshire, you quarantine for 14 days. We know that, and we've asked these questions with respect to our employees. We know people are going on vacation and doing those things. And so earlier this week, or excuse me, at the end of last week, our nurses were told in one of those calls that, well, that didn't necessarily need to apply to teachers. So on our call on Monday with Dr. Chan, a number of us asked that question, and the answer was essentially, and I'm not going to quote him, but essentially was, well, we recognize that schools would have difficulty opening and whatever. And to me, And in our conversations with some of the medical people we've been talking to, that's an answer of convenience, not an answer of science.
Yeah.
So we are holding to the 14-day quarantine. You'll see that later in the document. If people leave New England and come back, and will that cause us problems with classrooms, et cetera, other roles in the SAU? Absolutely. Is it the safe thing to do? Absolutely. So that's what I mean by that. A number of people ask me about the 3-foot versus 6-foot, and there are some infectious disease people who will tell you that is an answer of convenience. Third, the challenging nature of addressing student and staff illness protocol. You're going to see some of this later on, but quite frankly, the conversations I've sat in with nurses, because I've sat in the meetings that Dr. Arkilian's had with them the last few weeks, in terms of what happens if someone presents symptoms and the kinds of things that need to happen are difficult, dizzying. They've worked on it. They've done a great job. They have flow charts that actually show what will happen when. They plan to publish them for parents to see, but it's a difficult role. And so it's a very challenging part of this work. I've talked about this one already, but the uncertainty of planning in neighboring school districts. So, you know, we know that SAU 90 has gone to a hybrid model, and I've suggested to you earlier, I think even in last week's meeting, that causes issues for many of our teachers. We don't know specifically yet what Exeter will do, but that could cause issues for our employees. We know that Sanborn School District has gone to a 100% remote model, and that causes issues for our employees. The anticipated leaves of absence among our employees for health and childcare issues, which is very much related to that. But again, I'm going to go through with you a little bit in terms of, so that we all understand, we all have the same basic understanding of the rights that employees have under the Americans with Disabilities Act, under what they have with family and medical leave, and the COVID extensions of those bills, of some of those bills that go through December. And the lack of adequate funding to implement everything that we would want to have in place. And we've talked about permanent substitute nurse, permanent substitute teachers, increased transportation needs, some things that we might look at. We don't have the funding, nor is there funding coming through CARES in the amounts that would allow us to do some of the things that would create other options for us. So we've really been spending our time looking at 4 models. People should not call these phases. We did for a while. They're not. We're not suggesting that you start in one and work your way through to the others. They are different models that we've looked at. And so I'm gonna skip over model 1, because model 1 is in-person learning for all students with no restrictions, and we are not there. So I'm going to start in model 2, which is much what we surveyed people on, an in-school learning for students with restrictions, including a remote learning academy option. So let me show you some of the options, some of the pieces of that model. In this model, all students would return to school with modified rules of social distancing, group gathering, cleaning, general school operation. Students would follow their schedule with modifications and limited transitions. Not necessarily no transitions, but as I said to you last week, certainly limited transitions in terms of trying to operate more in cohorts. Students participating in this model would be taking courses that include an online component, although the courses themselves would be in person. We are committed to making sure that all of our courses in all of our schools have some type of remote component to them where teachers can share information, share assignments with students and their families. And so in one big piece that happens, one big piece that creates for us is the ability to move to an online platform or move to an online experience should the virus demand that that's what happens. Students riding buses would practice social distancing. They would not be permitted to carpool except with people residing at the same address. Appropriate supports would be in place for students with extenuating circumstances, including IEPs and 504s. So we know this is not the crisis plan that we had in the spring. We know that that students have to have those needs met. We have to have certain pieces that will be in place for them. We know, because I've gotten email, I've talked particularly with Dr. Arakilian, that as in a mask required environment, then not all students can do that. And we need to talk about the accommodations and modifications that would need to be in place for some students. And quite frankly, teachers, because of students with hearing loss or some other kinds of disabilities. Schools would implement their regular weekly schedule with modifications designed to minimize movement in the building and large gatherings, including lunch, recess, and unified arts classes. And we talked with you, I believe, the last time we were together about the possibility of unified arts being scheduled differently in these kinds of situations so that a unified art teacher is not seeing all kinds of different groups each week, but maybe just with the 4th grade for this 9 weeks, and then just with the 5th grade for the next 9 weeks, something like that. So we've talked about all those kinds of things to limit cohorts. Some of the in-school models would allow for additional time for cleaning and professional learning. So we've looked at students being in with a shortened day or no school on one of the days per week. We've seen models in our area where they're going to do some form of in-school, but they're going to do it 4 days a week. We've seen some that are doing a 4-hour day. And so we've looked at and talked about all of those. Masks would be required for all staff and students. Everyone would be asked to self-screen at the beginning of the day and required to report concerns and positive tests for themselves and others in their household. And that second part of this particular bullet, and you'll see that we say it again later in the presentation, none of this works if that doesn't happen. None of this works if that doesn't happen. And we're already starting to see examples of that across the country as schools are going back. Enhanced cleaning and sanitizing procedures are implemented, including sanitization of classrooms, bathrooms, and other shared spaces. Deep cleaning occurs nightly. That's a given in these models. And appropriate content, programming, and services would need to be in place to meet the needs of students and family, social, emotional needs. And I think you're going to see some examples of that later on. So some other factors to consider in this model: social distancing will be difficult to achieve and maintain at all levels. We know that. I've had emails that I've responded to from parents asking me how we do that in kindergarten or 1st grade. So we know it's more difficult at some levels. Masks will be worn with specific mask breaks included as part of the schedule. Desk dividers would be available in certain classrooms and situations. Our districts are limited in the number of individual desks available. So many of the models that I'm sure you've seen that say from the CDC, this is how you set up a classroom in an in-school learning model in a COVID world. And they show lots of desks all being turned and pointed forward. And many of you have been in our buildings enough that you know that that's not what the furniture looks like in many of our rooms. And so that presents another set of difficulties in how do you achieve that modeling with the furniture we have without going out and buying lots of furniture, which may be on the table. Yes.
Sorry, if I might add as well, that's not exactly how teaching and learning looks in our classrooms as well. If you walk into any one of our classrooms, we've got group work going on, we've got kids moving around. They're not all in rows facing forward. It's just a different practice altogether.
Thank you, David.
Yep.
Some students and staff would need accommodations, which could include the need to hire additional staff and or provide additional PPE. The one for me that sticks out there is just some conversations that Caroline and I in particular have had recently about preschool programs and the possibility that preschool programs look different than some of the other restrictions that are in place in some classrooms. So all of that are included in factors to consider. We have looked at hybrid, so I want to talk a little bit about it, but it also includes a remote learning academy option, and we are going to describe the remote learning academy here later on. So in this model, 50%, I want to be clear on this because a lot of people throw this term around as meaning something in particular. What it essentially means is 50% of your students attend school on one set of days and 50% of your students attend on another set of days. Or they split the day if you have enough money to afford transportation to do that. So we have a model in our region that's been proposed and I believe adopted that's a Monday, Tuesday for some students, and then Thursday, Friday for another set of students. There are models that are hybrid in Massachusetts being discussed that are 1 week on, 1 week off. So they're week hybrid models. So it can be any of those that limit the number of students to around 50%. Students would engage in a combination of in-school, remote, and independent learning in this model. Students riding buses will practice social distancing, same as we said in the other model. One thing I want to point out here is the difficulty of this in terms of the person teaching who has a group of children. Let's take the model that's a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. They have a group of half their students on Monday and Tuesday, and they would have needed to put up assignments, material for their students for the Thursday, Friday, or we would need to have scheduled it differently. But those remote days, in none of the models that I've seen do those remote days have a face-to-face component in them, except for one where I saw where they're using UAs, art, music, phys ed teachers on those days. Appropriate sports would be in place for students with IEPs and 504s. That becomes more complicated in this because you can say we have a 2-day-a-week model, and that, you can say that. But in terms of a student's IEP and what that IEP says, that student may be in 5 days a week for particular services having to do with their IEP. And that's what you're going to do as a district to make sure that that student's needs, individual needs, are met. Schools would implement a modified schedule with fewer students in the classroom and modifications designed to minimize movement, still trying to work on cohorts. Some of the hybrid models allow for additional time for cleaning and professional learning, like no school on 1 day a week. I believe that's the model that SAU 90 has adopted. I believe that day is Wednesday in their model. Masks would be required for all staff and students. And again, the self-screening, still an important part of the model. Enhanced cleaning and sanitizing, this is the same as the other with what we would be doing in buildings with respect to deep cleaning. And appropriate content programming and services for social emotional needs. And again, the difference in this model is that kids aren't in that SAU 90 model are not in 3 days a week. They're only in the building 2 days a week. So factors to consider: half our students would attend school at the same time. Independent and more remote learning would be available for students the other half of their schedule. And it would be independent or remote, again, unless you could schedule something more creatively with UAs or something like that. Student learning may be impacted due to the student's grade level, support at home, and social emotional needs in terms of access to those remote learning environment. Again, I think, Jason, if I get the number wrong, I think you'll correct me. I hope you'll correct me. Even when we I think we shared this with you, when we surveyed students, even after we'd made hotspots and all available, we found that something like 11% of our students reported that they did not have robust Wi-Fi access. Some students and staff would need accommodations, which could include the need to hire additional staff and or provide additional PPE. I happen to think that's even more possible in a hybrid model than in the in-person or the remote model. And social distancing would be easier to maintain, and mask breaks could potentially be provided more frequently because you're dealing with 50% of your students. So other in-person considerations, and this is a very important slide that I want to make sure our board members understand. So we have been working closely with our employees and our employee groups to make sure that people know their rights, to make sure that they know what options are available to them. And I'm not going to go deep into what specifically those options look like, but we're trying to give you an idea of the conversations that Charlene Sears, who's doing a great job in our HR department, is in with many of our employees. So what I've done is taken a document that we've been working on with Attorney Elwell and just sort of pulled out sections of that. So in terms of employees looking to see whether these descriptors describe them. I am subject to a federal, state, or local quarantine or isolation order related to COVID-19, or I've been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine related to COVID-19, or I'm experiencing symptoms and seeking a medical diagnosis. Rights for employees are included within the Families First COVID-19 Response Act or the Family Medical Leave Act, FMLA. So that's one category that people might look at. Second is I have to care for a family member who is subject to a federal, state, or local quarantine or isolation order related to COVID-19, or has been advised to self-quarantine related to COVID-19. Again, if employees see themselves in that, they have a conversation with Charlene, and they might look to their rights under that to fulfill the need that they have because of meeting this description. My child's school, daycare, or care provider is not in operation. And I would add to that, or is in operation less than the days I'm being asked to work. So, I think I've shared with this board from the beginning the importance of the Southeasters, or certain sections of the state, if not the entirety of the Southeasters, trying to work together on schedules. Earlier I said to you that we're seeing many different models pop up, and so that's creating concerns for employees and for us as school districts in terms of being able to meet their needs. So again, in the legislation that I believe came up in the spring, families have certain rights if this descriptor fits them. I have a serious medical condition or have an immediate family member who has a serious medical condition, and I need to care for them. Again, rights under the Family Medical Leave Act, if you look at this document and you believe that describes you as an employee. I have a disability as defined by the Americans with Disabilities Act. Again, if people see themselves in that, there's a particular conversation that they're having with HR and looking at their interaction with their physician, those kinds of things. And I'm not comfortable returning to school or have a reason other than those listed. So less in a category like that, but you can see from this that there's some number of conversations that are occurring just based on what you know coming into this presentation, based on what you've heard already in this presentation, that we owe it to our employees, and we're having conversations with them through Charlene and people in her office to make sure that we can help them with whatever accommodations may be mandated by their needs in some of these categories. And I just thought it was very important that you see this and understand what that looks like. So, general protocols. So, again, in whatever the model, and you've seen these before, they were in the beginnings of the plan that we presented the last time. Masks required for students and staff indoors. Masks may be removed outside with 6 foot plus distancing. Students and staff would be asked to bring their own masks, although we will have disposable surgical masks and possibly cloth masks available. And schools would work to ensure adequate mask breaks are built into their daily schedule. And again, with the accommodations that I talked about earlier, we're encouraging schools to create outdoor learning spaces, including having small tents so that classes can use them when appropriate. And our principals are doing a fantastic job of looking for whatever opportunities they can identify to get students outside. Again, as at least one parent, maybe more, have pointed out to me, that works for September and into October, right? School leaders would refine the building schedule to allow for the creation of cohorts. These teams I described earlier. In cases where this is not possible, like the high school, schedule changes would need to be made to minimize student travel between classes and movement in the hallway. And schools would arrange classrooms to ensure the 6 foot separation between students. We've said 11 here. It actually, depending on the size of the room, can go slightly more than that. But based on some of the conversations we have, we believe it's important to err more toward the 6 foot than the 3 to 6 feet, which is in some of the recommendation documents that we've received. Students and staff must stay home if they do not feel well. Again, I said this earlier. There's a couple of, this is another one of those that I would say, if that doesn't happen, this doesn't work. No aspect of an in-person model works if parents, students, and employees do not adhere to this requirement. We are continuing to explore the use of an online app for daily self-screening. Mr. Farrar has led that work. He's worked with our nurses. He's worked with our unions in terms of looking, is there something that can make this exercise simple for people who are coming to school for in-person learning? And this is what I talked about earlier. Any person traveling internationally on a cruise ship or domestically outside of Maine, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, or Rhode Island should quarantine for 14 days after return. And here you go. Here's here's what I mean by that continuing evolution. As of today, that's no longer true for Rhode Island if you're in the state of Massachusetts. I'm not sure if it's been modified in New Hampshire yet, but Rhode Island has been taken off the list of the New England states where you can go without quarantining for 14 days when you return. That happened today in Massachusetts. Dr. Arkelian, again, since I can't see everyone, was I turning this over to you for this slide?
I'm happy to speak to this slide.
Okay.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. So for student and staff screening, we wanted to include this slide with the most recent list of symptoms that are evident with COVID-19 to give you an idea as far as what nurses will be faced with when they have to send students home. So first, there's a staff and student screening that we would ask of families and staff before the school day, before coming into buildings. However, also, if a student is coming down with something during the day, this is the list of symptoms that a nurse would be assessing and determining if a student needs to go home. So if a student has any of these symptoms, fever and chills, cough, fatigue, muscle or body aches, headache, new loss of taste or smell, sore throat, congestion or runny nose, nausea or vomiting, diarrhea, shortness of breath or difficulty breathing, even if the student has a known condition, a diagnosed documented condition that is on file with the school nurse is not in a position to make the determination that this symptom was due to their pre-existing condition or due to COVID-19 or something else. So in an abundance of caution, school nurses would need to send students home with these symptoms. So hopefully if we have an online screening app, that's something that would happen before the school day regardless. However, if it happened during the school day, a student or staff member would need to go home if they're showing these symptoms.
Thank you. Do you want to talk about this one as well?
Sure. So this is outlining what I was just mentioning. So in a period of in-school learning, if a student or staff exhibit these symptoms with COVID-19, these are the steps that would have to be taken. Student or staff member will be referred to the school nurse and isolated and must leave school as quickly as possible. So nurses we're exploring if there's another area near the nurse's office where a student or staff can wait before being picked up, if it's a student being picked up. So that's one important piece of the process, and which staff would be supervising that student while they're waiting. That student or staff member will be required to be tested for COVID-19 per the DOE and provide documentation upon reentry. If COVID test is negative, they can return to school immediately once the documentation is provided to the school nurse. If it's positive, all individuals that student or staff member has come in contact with for a minimum of 14 days shall be quarantined. The positive test must also be reported to the school nurse. So in this situation, if a COVID test is positive, the school nurses will be required, before this point, the school nurses will be required to report this to DHHS, who will be in contact with the student. This is what they've been doing thus far. I hope that they have the capacity to do this into the school year when more and more kids are returning to buildings and they get more and more calls from school nurses. But at that time, DHHS goes through a process where they do some contact tracing. So they ask that individual, okay, you have a positive test. Who have you been in close contact with? So for longer than 10 minutes, within 6 feet, in the past 48 hours. And that person provides those names, and then DHHS calls those people and asks them to be quarantined for 14 days. If any of the student staff members who have been quarantined begin to exhibit symptoms, they must have a COVID test and provide a copy of the results to school. So even during quarantine, if they're exhibiting symptoms, they must have the test and provide a copy of the results to school. In addition, we have said, so after you've heard all of these, processes and protocols at school, and I didn't even talk about the PPE that so like the masks and the shields and the gloves and the gowns that they'll have to wear, and they'll have to change out students' PPE as they come in. They have to go through all of this very specialized protocol and training for this situation, for the COVID-19 scenario, if we're in schools. So because of all of that specialized training, no school will open if we don't have a school nurse or a trained substitute in the building. The law is that a principal or their designee fills in for a nurse when a nurse is absent if there is no substitute. However, in times like these, we need someone who is very crystal clear on these protocols and can send student and staff home accordingly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So again, this material was from the presentation before. If we are in an in-school or hybrid environment, no student field trips would take place. Educators are encouraged to incorporate virtual experiences, and there are a lot of them, as part of their daily lessons. I hope they do that if they're on remote as well. The use of buildings by outside groups would generally not be permitted, but will be evaluated on an individual basis. I think you'll hear more about that a little later in part of this presentation. We won't support any outside in-person professional development to include includes SAU-wide committees. Educators would be encouraged to participate in professional learning opportunities virtually. The example I have is of myself. I'm part of the professional development committee for NHSAA. Today, we decided that all of our professional learning and meetings through at least December will be held remotely because we don't want to create other kinds of cohorts where contact tracing becomes more difficult should someone become ill. Access to school buildings would be limited primarily to students, educators, and staff. Parents or visitors would enter the facility only on an as-needed basis with an appointment. And IEP meetings and parent conferences would be conducted virtually to the fullest extent possible, although we know there are circumstances where those meetings, where the only way to have those meetings, to have an effective meeting, would be face-to-face, and then we would have the appropriate PPE and social distancing in place so that those meetings could occur. Schools would need to manage traffic flow at the beginning of the end and end of the school day. This may include spreading it over longer periods of time or designation of spaces for students when they arrive. Still working on will be part of the individual plans that buildings will report on as we begin to build on this SAU plan. Facility managers would follow the New Hampshire cleaning and disinfection guidelines. Matt, do you want to say a word here?
Certainly. So we've been working closely with all of our facilities managers to really put in place a process for disinfecting all of our buildings. That includes during the day and then a nightly disinfection. We have particular focus on bathrooms and high touch areas. There are other areas that the facilities managers are taking keen attention to, including our HVAC systems, as far as maximizing the airflow and the air circulation, as well as the filtration of that air. So that's something that we understand is one of the most important components of this the operational piece of the school. Is maintaining that the cleanliness of the individual buildings. So additionally, we'll be providing hand sanitizer in all of our classrooms as well as our offices, and common areas. We will be asking all employees, students, and visitors to sanitize or wash their hands when they enter and exit both a classroom, office, or an individual building.
So, thank you, Matt. So the last time when we spoke with you, we talked about wearing masks and temperatures in buildings. And so you've seen this before, but I'll just mention it again. Many of our schools are not air conditioned and become unbearably hot in the fall and spring. Members of the school community have expressed concern about being able to teach and learn effectively in school buildings when temperatures are extreme. The concern is greater now in normal times because of face coverings. And we recommend implementation of a heat index, which takes into consideration both temperature and humidity as a metric. This is the metric. If heat index is in the caution zone, educators will be encouraged to teach in an outdoor environment. If it's in the extreme caution zone or above, we would call a heat day, and we would move to a remote learning environment, which is the way we're building our courses would allow us to do. We would be able to not have that day have to be made up, but switch to a remote environment. So that's another piece of the recommendation of this plan. So I want to talk a little bit about, or David, are you going to do this or am I doing this one? I forget.
Either way, I'm happy to go through it if you want.
Why don't you go ahead?
All right. So in this section, obviously this is under face-to-face considerations because in any face-to-face scenario, back up to the charts that Dr. Lupini showed, we are going to have to work with a number of our students and families that aren't able or willing to come into the building. So that's where the notion of the Remote Learning Academy kind of came to fruition. And as I've described this earlier to the joint board, but for those watching, the concept of the Remote Learning Academy is like a separate educational ecosystem that would exist online in a separate fashion from the face-to-face environment. It's obviously applicable to Model 2 or Model 3, which is face-to-face and hybrid. And of course, it's designed for those students who may be high risk, but you know, the other silver lining of a Remote Learning Academy is there were some students that flourished as we went into virtual learning in the spring. So this would be tailored to their learning interests as well. We would certainly make breakfast and lunch available as if you're enrolled in the Remote Learning Academy, so parents would be able to come pick that up. But you know, obviously the scheduling implications of creating this are significant. Participants that chose to enroll in the Remote Learning Academy would have to commit to that for, we're saying 1 trimester or return to face-to-face instruction. But we would need to be able to build sections and to rely on numbers in order to make that a feasible, viable option. Yeah, here, this next bullet's an important one, and it's one I want to make sure that everybody sees clearly, is as we talk through the Remote Learning Academy, this becomes a scenario where we would have to share teachers and resources across the SAU. It's back to the efficiency that Dr. Lupini was talking about. So if you enroll in a Remote Learning Academy, you may have a teacher that's not from your district. You may have a teacher that's from within the SAU. However, of course, they'd have the credentials and or certification needed to teach that grade level. And the other thing is back to the idea of certifications and availability. We will inherently have scheduling difficulties with the Remote Learning Academy. I think the best we can say, a student would not be guaranteed every course that would be in their schedule. However, we do have the opportunity to get creative with independent studies, and of course the presence of VLACs within the state is something that we could leverage to the best of our ability. And right, and of course, in the Remote Learning Academy, if you're learning from home, we'd put in structures in place to adhere to social emotional needs, social needs, and family needs associated with learning.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
So Caroline, do you want to introduce this?
Sure. So this is a video about how a preschool teacher is preparing her students for what she might look like in the fall in a building.
Hi, boys and girls. It's Miss Jen. I love you and I miss you so much. I hope that you're having a wonderful summer with your family and that everyone is staying healthy and safe. I just wanted to check in with you to make sure that everyone was okay and to let you know how much I was thinking of you. When we go back to school, Miss Jen might look a little different. My clothes might look a little different. I might have to wear gloves sometimes in the classroom. These gloves are going to go over my hands. Jen might have to wear something over her hair. So sometimes I might look like this. Ooh. But it's still me. See? Miss Jen might have to wear a mask. And you are going to have to wear a mask too, so that everyone can stay safe at school. Miss Jen is also going to have this really cool face shield on. So that I can stay safe and so can you. So I might look different in the fall, boys and girls, but it's still me. And I can't wait to see you, and I hope you have a wonderful summer. Bye, boys and girls.
Caroline, you want to say another? I think there was something else you wanted to say about that.
So we felt it was important to show this because for preschool students, you might imagine preschool students are ages 3 and 4. So you might imagine 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds very, very difficult to social distance, to keep them 6 feet apart, even 3 feet apart, and have them in a building is probably an impossible task. That being said, we have wrestled with if ages 3 and 4 should wear masks. We're considering having them not wear masks. And with that consideration, that means we need to take additional steps for the teachers to have additional PPE. And that is what that teacher was demonstrating, in that if we're having our regular ed teachers of older grades wearing masks, when their students wear masks, for teachers the kids maybe are wearing masks or have trouble wearing masks, whether because they're ages 3 and 4 or they have disabilities and will not be tolerant to masks, the preschool teacher or special education teachers will need additional protection to cover other mucous membranes, such as their eyes. So they would have to wear goggles or a shield in addition to their mask. And they'll also need to wear scrubs or a gown and gloves, because they will inevitably have to touch students, help students, whether it's feeding or toileting or holding them, keeping them safe. So we wanted to demonstrate some of the PPE realities that we'll be facing.
Yeah, I think the other reason for that is just to show you, and there are lots of these starting to pop up of the work that teachers are doing to make sure that they can begin to transition students as those students come back, right? To show them what they're going to look like, to show them some examples of what their classrooms, I've seen some of those, will look like, those kinds of things, all of which are important and all are in some of these next steps of the transition work. Thank you, Caroline. So in Model 4, which we're calling Enriched Virtual Learning for all students, and I want to separate this. This is not what happened in our SAU or in other SAUs in the spring. We very clearly called that crisis learning, crisis remote learning. And so here, I'll start, and then I think Dr. Hobbs is going to jump in here and take you through what we've proposed as what enriched virtual learning can look like. So in this model, 100% of students would participate in enriched virtual learning. And again, as I said at the beginning, that could be in a school, That could be across the SAU. Elementary students would be placed in a full remote class with a curriculum that aligns to the in-person model, as well as asynchronous activities. So they would have face-to-face activities, and they would have other assignments that would be in Google Classroom or in other locations. Middle school students would have a schedule. They would begin with a synchronous learning experience that starts in the morning. As you're going to see later on, they would have a schedule. Asynchronous activities would also be available for them. High school students would have synchronous learning experience that emulate a school day. Dr. Hobbs is going to walk you through a couple of sample schedules of all of this here in a couple minutes, just to show you the planning that could go into to making sure students have these experiences. Breakfast and lunch pickup would be available for families, much as it was in the spring, when we had up to, I think, 250 to 300 meals per day that we were distributing, breakfast and lunch. And so that would be available in this model. Appropriate content to meet the students' and family social emotional needs would also be available. Factors to consider here: an increased focus on the social emotional needs of our students has to be necessary, because in this model, again, they're in a remote situation, although you're going to see some really key differences here. Health concerns for some students and staff would be alleviated. So many of those concerns that we talked about earlier, that we saw on behalf of some of our students, and that we certainly are seeing off of that list that I showed you for staff, are alleviated in this model. Student learning may be impacted due to the grade level, support at home, and social emotional needs. Those issues with access, support, those kinds of things, many of them are still there, as they were in parts of the hybrid model. And we've spent a lot of time on the lessons learned from crisis remote learning that would certainly need to be put in place to lead to improvements in our programming. So I think, Dr. Hobbs, am I turning to you or Mr. Saltmarsh, or both of you, but I'll be your clicker through this, okay?
I'm happy to take everybody through this one. Sure. So obviously, I think it's smart to differentiate kind of what happened in the spring with kind of what we're putting on the table right now. And the reason is simple. We learned a lot this spring. We made fantastic progress, but we also understand that we had gaps, and I think it's important to put that on the table and to make sure we learn from them. So I just want to take you guys through a few of the lessons learned in crisis remote learning, and a schedule. I think we can repeat that over and over again. And we've heard it from families, we've heard it from school board members. The schedule, having a set schedule for learning is important. Now, I'll just add a caveat. That doesn't mean a kid sitting in front of a Zoom screen all day, and we can kind of hash that out in a little bit. Second is the integration of unified arts. One of the things that got dropped off the table with a lot of families this spring was unified arts, including art, music, physical education, how to wrap those into a holistic virtual experience for students. And the best models that we had throughout the spring were models that incorporated teaching teams, and they were models that integrated unified arts within the set curriculum, and allowed those teachers to be a part of the learning community. And that goes with special educators as well, and specialists, reading, literacy specialists, math specialists, etc. It's really important. Accountability. Well, we can say that each one of these is critically important for any kind of model, but the accountability, not only for our students, and this isn't a punitive accountability. This is an accountability that makes certain that students are participating, active, engaged in their learning, but also an accountability for teachers and an accountability for families as well. Provision of communication expectations between parents and teachers need to be articulated, and a regular feature of remote instruction. This is not, what we're proposing is not school via email, right? This is something where we're gonna have to have verbal conversations with moms and dads. We're gonna have to be present, and we're gonna have to be in our classrooms, etc. Physical transfer of materials. This is something that came up over and over again, and it's something I've got to give kudos to our working group as part of our remote learning aspect of our working group, really talked about the need for manipulatives or the need for actual learning materials to go home with students so that they can actually engage with the material as needed. So we would need to put that on a schedule for sure. And then the consolidated group of platforms, and I know Jason can speak to it, but I'll just kind of sum it up by saying, hey, look, we can't offer a long list of these platforms. We need to have a consolidated list of platforms that we support, that we offer training for moms and dads and students on, and that we expect our communication to take place through. And then the last one is opening of physical buildings for teacher access. This is an important one. This allows teachers not only to be in the building, access the materials and the resources that we do have within the building, but also use their classrooms, which is kind of the point, right? That means recording lessons or labs, preparing materials for pickup, drop-offs, but also engaging in that communication piece with moms and dads, progress monitoring, communication, whether that means verbal communication or written communication with families. So, here's, as a result of those changes, here's the list of characteristics of what we would call enriched virtual learning. And I, again, would just differentiate that from the crisis learning that we had this spring. And the first bullet is critical. Enriched virtual learning does not mean the buildings are closed. It does not mean that teachers are inaccessible. Enriched virtual learning means that the building is open. Teachers are in it. They're conducting their lessons. They are working in their workplace, and they're able to leverage all those resources in the buildings. Obviously, that includes small group work sessions. We're more nimble, for lack of better words, in terms of working with small groups. If certain kids are we have struggling with exponents, for example, in your math class, you can pull in 3 or 4 of those kids, socially distanced, and actually have a face-to-face targeted instruction with them. That's a really critical aspect of what we're talking about here. I've gone over the virtual schedule, and actually there's a few slides in here that kind of go over some sample schedules, what that would look like with regular attendance, check-ins, and the ability just to be in constant communication with teachers. It may include building-based meetings of academic clubs and or other activities. There's no reason why we can't, given proper precautions and cohort monitoring, we can't bring in groups of students to work, to engage in whatever they're doing, chess club or other kind of academic pursuits, right? Another caveat to this, and it's an important one, is that this model ensures that all students have access to their full course load and scheduled teachers. In other words, in this model, the teacher that you were scheduled with for whatever 7th grade science, you're actually going to have instead of an SAU-wide program. And that's important to some people, so we wanted to put it on the table. This model also allows for the scheduled pickup of materials, as we went over. It allows for assessments, local assessments, literacy assessments, some of the benchmark stuff that the SAS is putting out. It allows small groups of students to come into a classroom, for example, and take that benchmark assessment. So we have a system of diagnostics for our kids. And just the ability to see them face-to-face, to work with them, that is part of the testing environment. And a lot of people don't realize that, but there is a human connection there. And this model allows that to happen. And this is just a bullet, but it's a huge issue. This model addresses some of the equity issues that we saw emerge this spring, right? It allows for interventions with at-risk students, IEPs, struggling students. They can be scheduled flexibly, and we have some flexibility with numbers, and we have flexibility with just pulling students in to work with them based on their needs, which the other models really lack, in my opinion. This model may include ELOs, just like the Remote Learning Academy, independent studies, etc. And the last bullet's an important one. As Dr. Lupini has been saying it the whole time, each one of these factors that's associated with our learning is changing every minute. And that complexity, it creates for an environment where we really don't know what's coming next. So a caveat of this model that I think deserves emphasis is it puts us in a position where we can flexibly adjust to changing needs, conditions. You know, if we have to go into a shutdown, for example, we're set up for that. We've got a strong remote program. However, if guidance changes and all of a sudden our numbers can go up, or we can pull more kids into the classrooms for longer times, then we're in a position where we can do that. That's a really critical component of what we're putting on the table tonight. Okay, yeah, so I got to thank the working group for these sample schedules. Schedules are important, right? So I'll just take you through some virtual, sample virtual schedules for pre-K, half day. Obviously, we're in and out of instructional periods. We have synchronous learning. We have breaks baked in there. And we have whole class and individual instruction that happens virtually. The other caveat, obviously, is given us a purely remote scenario, we would be able to pull students in. Same thing with elementary grades 1 through 5.
Sorry, David.
No, that's fine. You're going to see with a lot of these schedules, I'll just emphasize, instead of the details, the ideas, right? You're going to see longer class periods. You're going to see the opportunity to work in large groups, small groups, breakouts. You're going to see the ability to actually do a lab demonstration. If you're a science teacher or a lab teacher in some respect, you're going to see group projects, collaborative documents, and traditional written assignments as well. Look, anything we can do in the classroom, I say that's fair game in a remote environment, with the added caveat that kids are struggling, or kids who need that extra motivation can come in and actually have somebody to talk to in the classroom. I want to emphasize this point that in this virtual, we're calling it a virtual model, but teachers would be in their classrooms in this virtual model. That's a really important point. Okay, yeah, now we're on the high school schedule. The high school schedule is right now proposed as an A-B, which means you'd see, block 1 or 3 during 8 to 9:15, and you'd go throughout the course of your day. One of the larger conversations we're having is a devoted time to face-to-face instruction, right? Can we carve out a segment of our day as a high school teacher where, hey, look, this is where you're working with small groups, and this is when you can actually focus on the face-to-face timing. That is a huge deal when you start talking about the transportation associated and the equity associated with transportation in this model. SST, we've had a lot of conversations with SST. This model does adhere to the SST schedule from what we know of the SST schedule right now. We have Warrior Block put in there at the high school level. And you'll also notice, is it in there? We've had conversations, I don't think it's made this draft, about actually scheduling lunch. And that doesn't sound like a big deal, but it is. Not only because kids need to eat lunch, but also because that would provide us, when and if we get to the point where we can just hop back into the building, that would provide kind of that seamless transition back into the building. That's an point. And attendance and grading, accountability is a piece that we know is important in the enhanced virtual learning. Students will be expected to join synchronous learning opportunities as scheduled. We know that's not going to be the case for every student. We know there are going to be complications that arise in there. But our recommendation from the working group is, hey, look, in those scenarios where a kid can't attend the scheduled instruction time, we're going to have mom and dad involved, and we're going to have a plan to mitigate that as much as possible. And or just, it can't be a kid saying, hey, I couldn't make it. We do have to have that accountability piece in place. Attendance, sorry?
Just tell me when. Okay.
Attendance would be a normal component of this. And grading and reporting, that's an important thing. There would be no diminishing in terms of the standards or the competencies that are associated with our classes. We would have that set list of standards and competencies. We wouldn't be teaching 2 days and off 2 days. So the notion there is we'd be able to get through a relatively full palette of curriculum, which is an important point as well, right? And at the high school level, of course, with respect to some of the electives and some of the independent studies that we might get into, high school students may work with their advisor to determine learning standards for classes. I'm good. Okay. And accountability, this is just 2 slides. And this comes again from the working group that where we put this together as part of the enriched virtual. Teacher responsibilities are of utmost importance in this model. I'm not going to read them to you, but they keep teachers in the building, and they keep teachers accountable for providing all the bullets that we've already talked about. Next, and student and parent responsibilities. That's something that's not lost on us. This is a 2-way street. So we would have to articulate student responsibilities in the remote learning as well as parent and family responsibilities. Okay, so the phase transition into buildings. This is the point I was trying to make earlier with respect to the ability to, well, be nimble as conditions change in this model. Obviously, we've already adopted the school calendar, allowing for increased teacher PD days around virtual instruction, around SEL, technology like PowerSchool, for example. We do have that as a component of the enriched virtual. Orientation meetings, that's something that popped up over and over again, especially in our community forums. That's something that, that it would be possible. And something that we would encourage in this virtual environment, meaning that we could actually have small groups of kids come in and have a face-to-face orientation with their class. That is critical in terms of relationship development, and that's critical in terms of setting learning expectations and all the things we know are best practice in teaching and learning. And again, the size of those groups can be flexible, right? And as conditions change, we can tailor to meet the needs of our kids, but also to meet the needs of our community. We have a list of student orientation topics. That is a very small list of a much larger list that we would need to go through with students and families, but it gives you a taste of kind of what the topics might be, the big umbrella topics that would live in an orientation program. Right, and of course, as I said earlier, in buildings where we have recommended starting the year in remote instruction, we can augment this model in terms of maybe longer time with students, or maybe increase cohort sizes depending on how the guidance shifts as things become safer for students and staff. And we would of course guarantee a regular reassessment of conditions on the ground and be able to tailor pretty quickly according to that guidance.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Jason, did you want to say a word about technology?
Sure. So as far as technology goes, you know, we realize that this is what's going to hold things together in a remote scenario. And one of the tentpoles of this plan is to have equity. So along those lines, we need to make sure that our students have Wi-Fi, that they connect their school provided devices to the internet so they're able to participate remotely. And last year we distributed about 50 cellular hotspots to families that did not have internet access in their homes. We intend to do the same thing again. In addition to that, we're going to reach out to our community partners to try to identify locations within the towns that may have open Wi-Fi access that they're willing to share with students and families. This year, all of our schools across the SAU are now in a position to be able to distribute devices one-to-one in children's grades 4 through 12. That's a better position than we were in last year when we went to our crisis remote option. And along the lines of support, Dave already mentioned that we're going to try to streamline things and make them a bit more efficient in terms of the number of apps and ways that kids learn online. But we also want to spend some time to pay particular attention to supporting not only students and teachers, but to have some tutorials and resources available for parents in particular to help them if they're helping their students at home. And we will have support by email, we'll have support by phone, and we'll be testing a live chat tool this year so that if students or parents need something spur of the moment, they'll be able to chat live with one of our technicians on site in the schools.
Thank you. Caroline or Matt, do you want to talk about meals?
Sure. So from a, in an in-person scenario, we would be looking at simplifying our breakfast and lunch offerings. We'd be offering or we're exploring some online pre-ordering software so that students would be able to select a streamlined menu offering, and that would be a bagged lunch. That it will look a little different in each school. In some instances, it would be delivered to the classroom, and others there may be pickup. However, we do envision meals eaten in the classroom. However, in some of our buildings, there may be some flexibility, with the proper social distancing, to have some students in a cafeteria or a larger setting. We would need to look at our, on a case-by-case basis, how to staff those lunch periods in the classroom, as well as the additional trash and cleaning requirements involved. For those students that would be working from home in a virtual or remote setting, we would continue to have meals offered. That this would either be via pickup at the individual schools or a delivery, via our bus transportation.
Thank you. Dr. Killian?
Thank you. So what we know is that students need to feel safe, they need to feel secure, they need to have their needs met before they can learn, before they can be students and learn academics. So we know it's very important for us to focus on social emotional learning, student and staff mental health and wellness. So in that regard, we're focusing on creating building level teams. In some schools, these already exist. But at this point, we need to have these teams so we can plan for social emotional learning during professional development to identify the gaps where we might need to strengthen these supports for students in and out of virtual learning. Go ahead. This is not only for students, but it's for staff, giving them opportunities. We're already talking about how to start the school year to help adults who were really torn out of their workplaces in a matter of days, how they can come back, have opportunities to connect again, connect with their coworkers, connect with their peers in a way that will help them feel secure and have connections with the people they used to see in the hallway in between every classroom. The learning environments for students, we're looking at how we can support students in the multi-tiered systems of support. So that includes our counseling, our school counselors, special education. It includes interventions, but it involves looking at all of these different interventions in different ways, additional ways, since we may be teaching students both from home and in buildings. And lastly, it's about the data. So we plan to assess students to find out the trends, the patterns, and individual needs of students, so we can make sure that we're implementing what is actually relevant for our kids given the circumstance.
Thank you. This is yours as well.
Thank you. So I'll transition right into special education. So specialized instruction, so that's instruction delivered by special educators and related service providers. Also other services provided by our essential educational associates. So this includes, related services include speech and language therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, counseling, behavioral support. These will all be coordinated for in-person small groups during enriched virtual learning. So where we are having enriched virtual learning, the directors are going to be working very hard to create opportunities for students to come in, for small groups to receive these services. We know a lot more this fall as far as how to keep kids safe, which is different from March and April, where schools were shut down, the state was shut down, businesses were shut down. Now we know how to keep small groups safe and to deliver these essential services in person. Related services will be individualized outside of the classroom in the in-person model. So where students are in buildings, that's okay. Where students are in buildings, to preserve the cohort, we want to have students come out of the classroom and meet with their related service providers as much as possible, rather than the adult going from class to class to class, which would then be increasing exposure, potentially exposing students to a virus. Specialized transportation will be provided for all students attending special education small group instructions in buildings, regardless if it's in the IEP. So we have a rubric that will determine which students will be coming in for small groups, and that'll be provided for our students, and that's how we'll determine who's coming in with specialized transportation. And as we stated before, special ed meetings will be held virtually to the maximum extent possible, even if and when staff and students are in buildings. We would still hold these meetings virtual, except for the case when a parent is unable to access the meeting virtually from home. We will still hold the meeting and bring the parent into a building. Evaluations will continue to be held in person. We held some evaluations this summer with tabletop plexiglass dividers. So we'll continue to do that. They need to be held in person to have a valid assessment when we're doing an assessment with a school psychologist or related service providers.
Thank you. So let me say a word about athletics. And this pertains mainly to the high school, not exclusively to the high school. So the NHIAA has delayed the start of the fall sports season until Tuesday, September 8th. I actually met with our athletic director and the high school principal largely about that issue today. They have indicated that it is up to each participating school as to whether they will participate in each sport offered. They are issuing return to play guidelines for each sport that make recommendations on face coverings, pre-workout screening, entrance and exit strategies, travel, locker rooms, athletic training areas, and even numbers of spectators at indoor events. We are actively engaged. It's part of our weekly agenda of the Southeastern superintendents. And I know Mr. McGowan's engaged in these conversations with the Southeastern principals as well. With respect to their decision-making regarding fall sports, we will be making recommendations to the Winnicott School Board when and if it becomes appropriate and necessary. Given the issues with transportation and maintaining cohorts, when we come to each of our K-8 boards over the course of the next few weeks, we will be recommending the cancellation of middle school sports for the fall season. We are still discussing intramurals and other kinds of activities that could be put in place during that time. So I want to leave the athletics piece at that. So in terms of transportation, Mr. Ferraro, do you want to handle this one?
Certainly. So transportation is certainly presents a challenge under the restrictions as far as social distancing and how many students we can fit into a standard school bus. So for reference, a standard 80-person school bus can accommodate 13 students with 6-foot social distancing. So we did take a look at this this issue via our surveys. And we do anticipate that the demand for transportation should be significantly lower. We will have to do a full audit as far as our routes and our number of students to determine how we will proceed. But we are cautiously optimistic that we will see a significant decrease to better socially distance. I will note that the state of New Hampshire guidance that was published by the Department of Education does not require social distancing in school buses. However, we feel it's our duty to provide as much social distancing as possible, certainly within a school bus, which is typically a contained inside area. We are working with First Student as well as Durham School Services, who provides our transportation for our students with special needs, for our regular daily routes, as well as our other activities. And they have put together a cleaning protocol, both on a daily basis, as well as a monthly disinfectant that does continue to sanitize throughout the month. But all buses would be wiped down between every run. Additionally, bus drivers would be wearing masks, at all times except while actively driving. There are some safety concerns about wearing masks while they are driving. So that we have included those protocols in this document, so those can be accessed on their website as well.
Thank you, Matt. So I want to spend a moment now with you on what we're recommending. We said up front a couple things, that this was differentiated by school, that it was based in our data. We tried to lay out what the major elements of those data were. They included our student parent surveys. They included our staff data that we have to date. They included some of the protocols that need to be put in place and whether we believe they can be carried out. And the one thing I know is that this is a recommendation as of the 5th of August. And it may not be the recommendation by next week for some of the factors that we laid out for you earlier. So the recommendation at this point is that the Barnard School would have in-school learning for grades K to 8, possibly with an abbreviated student day. That's something we're actively looking at, is whether there would be an abbreviated day. There would obviously be a remote learning academy offered to families that chose that option instead of the in-school learning experience. At Lincoln Ackerman, we would do the same. An in-school learning for grades K to 8, again, possibly with an abbreviated student day. It's something we're actively looking at. Also with remote learning academy offered for those families that were not interested in that in-school learning model. And again, I want to reiterate something that Dr. Hobbs said, which maybe we should have bolded. This does not mean that students who chose the remote learning academy would have teachers from those schools. It's impossible for the 7th grade social studies teacher at either one of those schools to be the in-person teacher and the remote learning academy teacher. We would be creating a remote learning academy from teachers that we have in the SAU. And I've been asked a number of times about publishing lists of those teachers. That's going to happen at some point. I'm not sure if people think that they need that information to make a decision, that they're going to have that information to make a decision. It's probably not going to happen in that kind of a timely, in their minds, fashion. At Northampton, we would recommend an in-school learning model for grades pre-K to 4, again, possibly with an abbreviated student day. We would recommend offering the Remote Learning Academy for students that chose not to participate in the in-school learning in grades pre-K to 4. And we would recommend enriched virtual learning for grades 5 through 8. Much as Dr. Hobbs described, that model would be in place for students 5 through 8. Again, without going into the specifics of any one factor, it's really the interaction of all of those factors that we talked about earlier in this presentation that lead us there. At Seabrook Elementary, we're recommending the in-school learning for grades pre-K to 4, again, possibly with an abbreviated student day, and the Remote Learning Academy option for parents who chose that for their child. As Dr. Hobbs has described, right? which is a different model than what we ran in the spring. At Seabrook Middle School, we would recommend the enriched virtual learning model for all students, as Dr. Hobbs described and as people can access in this presentation. And at Winnicott High School, we would recommend starting the year with an enriched virtual learning. We are committed to continuing to revisit this plan over the next 5 weeks. And we are committed to continuing to revisit this plan as the school year starts to see if there are opportunities to move from a more enriched virtual learning environment to a more in-school environment. We know we're going to start out in that enriched model with opportunities for in-school, as Dr. Hobbs described earlier. But we want to move as many students to in-school learning opportunities as we can as we continue to assess our student data, our family data, our employee data, and the virus. So I want to say a couple other things before we conclude this and take your questions from board members. So there are details that you don't see in here yet, right? There was not in this presentation, as lengthy as it was, the specifics of our cleaning protocol. Those are going to be published. Those will be published so that people can see them. You didn't see, even though Dr. Arakilian described it, the decision tree for nurses to use. However, that will be available and parents will see it before the school year begins. So there are a number of things that are still in process of being created, but I think you'll find that there's a great deal of detail in this presentation tonight. Our next steps, we believe, are to continue to work with our principals. We have 5 board meetings coming up, individual board meetings. And what we will be asking principals to talk about as part of those meetings is where they are in sort of the individual planning in putting these steps into place, assuming this is adopted tonight as the plan moving forward. Principals will be reporting on what the specifics are as much as they have of where we are in those meetings over the course of the next few weeks. And we will continue to update you and come back to you where changes may need to be made to this plan, because they will happen. I've learned as I've been sitting here about 2 other districts in the southeastern part of the state and decisions that they've made which will impact the decisions of the people who teach our children. And so we need to continue to reassess those. One of the next steps for us that all principals would report on is the idea of verifying that people want the in-person model and are coming in, so we actually know if we can accommodate that number. We think we can in the places where we've chosen to do that. We're not 100% sure, and we won't be 100% sure until we're able to verify the particular enrollment status of people, whether it is in a virtual, whether it is in a in-person model. So that will be some of the work over the next few weeks. You know, this is a set of recommendations, obviously, that we're making to you, and now the real work begins. So I'm going to stop the presentation, and we will take questions from board members tonight, and we will be setting up those opportunities, whether they're at our individual board meetings or whether we do a couple of other community forums to answer questions from the community over the coming weeks. And I'm really pleased that all of our principals have joined us here tonight, not specifically to talk about where they are with those plans. That's not why they're here, but they're here because they wanted to be here as we talked about the different elements of this plan, all of the moving parts, and really as they begin to plan the particulars of implementing these plans at each of their schools. So we're happy, Mr. Keim, to answer questions. I apologize for the length of that presentation, but I think it was necessary to get to that level of detail to really understand what the work is that we've been engaged in and what's ahead of us.
I think you need to apologize for doing a thorough presentation.
You know, I think we really appreciate all the work that everybody's done. And I think everybody recognizes there's a tremendous amount of unknowns, and things are going to shift as new facts develop. But I think we're very prepared, and I just want to commend everybody before we get to the questions for all the work that's been done, and I want to thank you all. So
Thanks, Jim.
So I guess I'm going to open it up to the board members to ask any questions or have any comments on the plan.
Hi, I just want to echo that also. Thank you guys. This is really an impossible situation, and I'm really just overwhelmed and impressed with all your hard work and all your thoughts. So thank you. And I absolutely respect that everything's going to change in the next few weeks. But could you speak for just a minute about what was the basis for those recommended models across the different schools? Because I was a little surprised to see what some of the recommendations were. Thank you.
So it's really, and the one piece that I cannot lay data out on and won't is that employee piece, right? Because those conversations are still in process. People have rights under of confidentiality in those conversations. And so it's really an interaction of when we took a look at the response rates and tried to take those and take them to scale for the entire school. And then we took a look at where our employee requests are, took a look at things like rooms available, those kinds of things, and really tried to figure out within that whether it was possible to start with an assumption, as we started in one of the early slides, if we could start with the assumption of all students who wanted to be there in school. And in some places we found pretty quickly, because of those elements, sometimes individual elements, sometimes the elements in conjunction with one another, we found that in some places it wasn't possible. And that's what led us to the, and I think we realized early on, right, that we were going to need to look at this in terms of individual schools and not necessarily as an SAU, even though that's a complexity in and of itself. And so that's what we tried to do.
I have a quick question for, I guess maybe this is for Dave Hobbs there. In the enriched virtual learning, you said that the teachers would be in the classroom where they have the resources, where they have everything that they would need. How would the kids get to that classroom? Is it going to be Zoom? How do we get connected to that? Is one of my questions. And does that only include those teachers that have said, yes, I am willing and able to go back to school? What about the rest if they are not?
Yeah, David, let me take that part. So we know every situation, this is a great question. Every situation, I'll take the latter part of your question. Every situation is a little different, right, in terms of the requests. So, you know, I can say this generally, SAU 90 has chosen a model that has kids in school Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, Friday. That means that we might have to be flexible with some employees as to being in a couple days and teaching from home a couple of other days. But the model is based on at least some presence of teachers in the school teaching from their classroom. And yes, you heard Jason say back in the spring, as part of the work that we were doing, to try to make sure that we had the capacity to do that kind of teaching from our classrooms in our school buildings. And thanks to Jason's work and your tech directors throughout the SAU, I believe, Jason, that we're there.
So for the first part of the question, it's an excellent question as well. And maybe the best way to kind of get at the answer is to just visualize what it might be like to be a teacher in this environment. So if I'm a teacher in this environment, obviously I'd report to work in the morning, meaning report to my classroom. I may have some lessons that I'm teaching on Zoom or synchronous lessons that are adhering to the school schedule, where I'm actually broadcasting out of my classroom into the homes of my students, right? But there's another option or caveat in there where some of my time, whether it's during the scheduled class time or whether it's a separate time, could be scheduled face-to-face time with groups of students or independent studies or whatever the case may be, where I'm actually face-to-face in the building with my kids. Another caveat is I've got my resources around me, but I've also got my professional resources around me, right? So teachers are, we're able to work collaboratively to the extent possible, meet in PLGs or PLCs, professional learning communities. The other caveat that I'm seeing, frankly, is we're learning how to navigate the building where the hot spots might be as kids start to re-enter our buildings, and understanding the protocols and understanding the rules and regulations. I think that should be underscored as well, about the opportunity for the Teachers' Day.
We also know there's a need for some transportation within that model if we're going to bring kids in small cohorts. We've started to try to figure out what that might need to look like. We're not there yet, but we're committed to this idea that in small groups that students would be able to meet with a teacher, as Dr. Hobbs has described.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I was curious on where did that fit in as far as, looking at Northampton statistics on how many parents would send their kids to school overall versus how many teachers we would have if those teachers may not even be there, if we are in this enriched learning, if they fall into that, say, half that can't be there.
So we believe as we sit here today that the majority of people who are making those kinds of requests would be able, again, we're playing through those requests, would be able to be in their classroom at least some days a week. We believe that's the case. Now, listen, if over the next 5 weeks, districts around us start shifting to completely remote, obviously that changes that calculus, right? So, but where we sit today, on the 5th, we believe that those opportunities exist.
Good.
I'd like to ask a
Greg
question.
Parrish. Greg Parrish. Bill, I have concerns about the freshmen under the enriched virtual learning, and I wonder if you guys could speak to the emotional side of that. This is a huge transition for these young folks, and I'm just curious what effect that.
So we lost the end of that, Greg, but I think you asked us to comment specifically on freshmen, and I don't know, David, Caroline, do you want to start that? I have a few thoughts. But...
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's a recognition that we're all making in this, is that not only do we have a rough transition for all of our students going from grade to grade, but some are actually going from building to building and or district to district. So with respect to the freshmen, we do have freshman STEM scheduled as part of the regular learning day. Am I getting feedback?
Yes, I'm hearing some feedback somehow.
Sorry. Freshman SEM is scheduled as part of the learning day, and that would be a synchronous experience where you're actually with a small, group of freshmen together, and your teacher. So you're able to make those connections, those social connections, ideally. We're also, and I know Bill McGowan can speak to this because we've had these conversations, talking about some of the orientation processes, fresh start, that kind of thing, where we're going to get kids into the building appropriately, distance and all that, but just getting that social element back, because we all recognize that's a deficiency.
And if I could quickly add that really quick.
Caroline, I'm sorry.
Quickly, regarding the emotional side of it, in that, the students who are absolutely right, the students who are changing districts, the students who are coming in as kindergartners, that's something that we've identified as a priority to help teachers. I mean, students in every grade really will have having teachers. So we've identified that as a big priority for staff and professional development, as far as how to make connections with students online, things they haven't had before. So that's certainly something that's on our minds, and that's important.
Thank you.
Now I'm on mute because I put myself on mute because there was feedback and somebody said, please put yourself on mute. Mr. McGowan, I do not want to put you on the spot, but do you want to say a word about that?
Yes. A couple of things. I mean, we are taking a look to see how we can do fresh start at a different level, smaller groups. But this year, since we will be going virtual, there's two components. There's Fresh Start to do some team building, to provide the computers and the schedules to the students. But then how do I get some face-to-face, in-person, face-to-face with the teachers? Because these students have never seen their teachers. So how can we work as we start the school year to create a schedule so we can bring small groups of the freshmen in to meet their teachers, to walk around the building. So those are two components that we're working on. And now that we have a pretty good idea of this plan, I'll be working with my team to the Fresh Start teachers to create the Fresh Start program, and then also the transition program when we start school.
Mr. Marsh, did you have a question?
Yes, I do. Just a couple questions. One, if 2/3 of the parents want in school, the students that want to come to high school, why are we going virtual? We're not listening to the parents.
Henry, you're really breaking up, but I think I understand the question you're asking. If you're looking at the survey data and you're saying if the survey data comes out as indicating that parents want a particular model, why are we not doing that? And the answer is, as I said earlier, because it's not just those data. There are a number of sets of data which include all those factors that I mentioned and more, which includes staff in terms of our decision making. And so that's what's led us to these recommendations.
I have a question. So you made reference to that this is ever changing. Are we going to set times when we'll reassess at when we can potentially go back, especially for the high school? Are we going to do it at like 2-week intervals or based on other schools? Or because I gotta tell you, I'm really, really sad for our kids and what this is for them in the future. I don't know about, I look at everybody else's faces here and our 5th graders and up, it's not going to be the same. Their lives are changing, and enriched or not going in and having those social interactions, it's not going to be the same. For our high school students, small groups at Fresh Start is not going to be the same.
No one here, Aaron, is pretending that it's going to be the same.
I know, but I'm so sad that we can't at least try to give high school a shot for these kids. Because if you spent a second at the beaches, everywhere we go, kids are together, kids are without masks. They are going to hockey. They are going to hockey together. They are playing soccer together other places. And things are okay right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping that we can at least assess on a short-term basis on how we can get these kids back.
So we haven't set up those markers yet, but what we try to do, and maybe we didn't do a great job of doing it, what we try to do is indicate that we're trying to work toward more presence in buildings out of even those virtual models, right? That we're trying to make those experiences happen and that we're trying to increase those numbers of experiences, all with the goal of having students in school, right? That's the goal. And so can I tell you, we haven't had that conversation that we're going to reassess that in mid-September or October 1st. No, but we're happy to go back and start having those conversations so that we can put those markers in place. But those markers depend on, as I said a number of times, and I can't explain it in any more detail. They include a number of different factors, right? Which are some what parents and students want, are some what we're able to do in terms of staffing, are some what we're able to do in terms of size of classrooms and social distancing. and all of those kinds of things. They're dependent on all of those factors.
Can I
And
say
you
something?
should know that, by the way, that no, it's not okay. We're not okay.
Hello?
Do you want me, Kelly? Yes.
So I couldn't agree with Erin anymore. I agree 100% with everything she just said. I work for municipality and we have all gone back to work. All of everybody I work with have babies in daycare that have gone back to work. So for me, this is really hard to absorb because we didn't really have a choice. We had to resort to those measures and it seems to be working. I think I just wanted to ask, with all the work that has been done, which is absolutely amazing, has there been any type of data that has been obtained to see how many families within our district with children have actually tested positive with COVID? I mean, I understand it's a HIPAA issue, so you can't give out names, but has there been any type of data to show how many families within the school district have children or even parents that have tested positive with COVID in order to have to do all these measures?
We don't have those. We don't have the access to those data.
So we don't know if even one family has tested positive.
We don't have access to those data.
Okay.
Can I chime in a little bit on that one? I get on NHPR every night to see what the statistics are, and you can see by town. There's a map of New Hampshire, and by town it shows you a rough estimate of the COVID cases in your community. And I did check right before we got on. I don't know how accurate it is, so maybe it's not right for me to share that, but I would recommend, if you want to get on NHPR and follow the COVID tracker, you can see how well our community is actually doing. It's impressive.
Thank you, Heidi.
Jim, if you want me to help, I can do that. Greg?
I raised my hand.
Oh, I see that.
No, on the screen too. Hey, quick question. And again, thank you for all the work. I realize this is an incredibly fluid process. And so I have a multi-part question. One, I'm not exactly sure what I'm voting on tonight because what I see in front of me is such a variable plan. Yeah, I could vote on it. There's a ton of aspects that I agree with and understand, and then there's some stuff that I don't agree with and understand. So I'm really sort of, I'm kind of over a barrel with what exactly I'm voting to approve tonight. The second thing is more specific when it comes down to my district in the virtual for Northampton 5 through 8.
Yes.
And I guess my question, from what I've heard, I know I got on a little bit late, but from what I heard was a lot of lower grades can be difficult to socially distance. They don't want to wear their masks. They're a little bit more, they're just younger. And so it almost felt like the opposite might be true, that a virtual experience for the lower grades could be more beneficial versus keeping our 6th through 8th graders home, which is a time of rigor as they're preparing for high school. And so I guess I'd want to dig in a lot more on that before I started casting a vote. Does that make sense?
Yes. I'm sorry, I totally blanked on the first part of your question.
Well, it was so long, I forgot the first part.
Oh, what are you voting?
What are we voting on?
I believe you're voting on allowing us to begin to implement those plans, those specific plans. Again, with respect to athletics and those kinds of things, those would come to individual boards. But we need to get started on trying to put some things in place soon. So that's our recommendation, is really that one of that last sheets in terms of that model. Obviously, there are some specifics within that we have to come back. If we come back with a shortened day, we have to do that fairly soon, and we would be able to do that, we hope, by the board meetings that are coming. With respect to the middle level piece, I mean, I have an answer, but I don't know if any of my colleagues want to jump in on that first.
So I would chime in with respect to the lessons learned. One of the driving factors there in terms of student learning is the ability to work with technology independently. And I mean, I have a kindergartner and I have a third grader, and it's very difficult for those students to actually log on and work independently with the technology. So from a curriculum standpoint, that was certainly something we wanted to highlight.
Yeah, I believe that I believe that captures where we ended up. We in the experiences that we had much more difficult experiences in the primary level with technology-based learning than we did or think we can in middle and high school. So I think that was part of it.
How come Northampton is the only one with a recommendation for 5 through 8 to go virtual, where the others?
You're not. Seabrook has the same recommendation.
Are there other middle schools that are non-virtual?
Pardon?
Are there other middle schools that aren't going virtual?
No, there are not. Those two, and those are our two larger 5 through 8.
So Lincoln Ackerman is in school.
Lincoln Ackerman is in school, and it's 200 students in total. That's right. And it's going to be less than that if we have the numbers that we believe we'll have for remote. So some of it has to do, as I said earlier, with size, with size in classrooms, those kinds of factors.
Bill, just kind of reading the room, and I'm trying to understand why we would do a vote across all schools here. I think wouldn't the vote need to occur at the school level?
Well, because if we do it that way, we won't know what we're implementing until after the 18th of August.
I wouldn't. I know ours is tomorrow, but
right.
I mean, I guess I would encourage the various school boards to maybe consider accelerating that discussion. It would seem to me like I would be uncomfortable, just from my perspective, Southampton resident, kind of voting on a plan where it impacts Winnacunnet. Like that doesn't really seem to make a lot of, it just doesn't seem to be something that, I think makes sense from my vote perspective. I know it's a joint board and everything else, but I really think that's it's a town by town vote, in my opinion.
Can I add one piece to that? Is it okay if I weigh in here for a second on that? I actually wondered that too. I think I asked, how can we ask a vote across all our board members when we have different plans for different schools? However, the Remote Learning Academy is SAU wide. So it's as if now more than ever, we are linked more than in the past, because in order to accommodate students and staff who have reasons to stay out, we need to partner and we need to work together. So I think it's actually perfect timing for us all to be together now, just to allow the process to continue. And then the second phase would be to be at the individual board meetings, to then hear more information about the, your district plan, and to approve or reject different aspects of the plan. So that's how it made sense to me, for what it's worth.
Thanks, Caroline.
So does that mean that we are, the vote is about approving the models and not the specific recommendations per school, which I recognize might not, be the same ones in a month?
I've read it this way. So we have to have a majority of each board here to take action. And I believe those votes within the individual district, again, in the interest of time, right? That's why we pulled together here like this to look at a plan. But I believe if the Northampton board in their piece of this vote did not approve the plan, then we'd have to go back to the drawing board on the Northampton part of the plan. That's the way I've interpreted it. Now that may be a total misinterpretation of it, but that's how I interpret it.
Bill, Greg Parrish, but this is a SAU proposed plan for the SAU 21 district. And
I can't hear you, Greg. I'm sorry.
Usual.
Hey, Greg, maybe type your question into the panelist piece.
Was I breaking up? Sorry.
Oh, there you're back.
I just see this as a SAU 21 proposal for the entire district. And as a joint board, that's what we're voting on. Maybe I'm seeing it wrong, but that's how I view this.
Jim, may I ask a couple questions, if I may?
Yeah.
So first of all, Dr. Lupini, thank you to you, your team and the task force for the work that you've done. Certainly comprehensive evaluation, and you thought about a lot of things. Flexible and adaptable, I think it's going to be key here, and I appreciate that you put safety first. As we talk about enriched virtual, couple questions and comments. Round numbers, what percentage of synchronous versus asynchronous will there be for K through 5 and then through 6 through 8? And the synchronous versus asynchronous will come together with my next couple questions.
David, you want to take that?
So, I mean, that's going to be largely, Tom, on school schedules. However, we've set the expectation, at least in our working group, that when you have a scheduled class, that's when your synchronous learning takes place. The caveat to that, though, is obviously, if you take the parallel of like classroom instruction, right? It's not always just kind of standing and deliver to an entire class. It's working in small groups, it's pairing up, it's doing all those kind of things. I think those are also encompassed in what I would call a synchronous learning experience for kids. So, the short answer is as scheduled by the building schedule. The longer answer is, it's flexible, it's varied.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think about this from the family's perspective, and I really appreciate, and Dr. Lupini, you've said this in the past, that we've looked at this from other districts and making sure that what's happening in SAU 90 and Sanborn, we're making sure that we're paying attention for our teachers because they need to balance work and home. The same thing's going to hold true for all of our parents across the district, right? Because they need to work too, and they need to be able to have plans and know when they need to be home, and know when they need to be teachers because they're helping with asynchronous work and unpacking that. So I think we really need to think about how we're going to support our families through this process. And there hasn't been a whole lot of talk there. So I'd like to dig into that a little bit before I ask a couple of additional questions.
So I think we have started on that. I think that's why we have schedules. That's why with David's group started to create schedules of what those experiences could look like. That was one of the things that we were asked for. We haven't started to really bargain this. I need to say that yet. So that needs to happen. We've made it very clear that the things that David outlined earlier are non-negotiables with us, that they need to be part of those discussions. So listen, I know there are lots of other pieces as to what specifically that looks like, but in terms of wanting to make sure there were daily synchronous experiences, to make sure that there were live experiences with teachers on a daily basis, and that entire list of lessons learned, I think they came out of what we heard from families and have tried to build into this 2.0 model.
So the sooner, obviously, the better, because we need folks to plan. So you mentioned one of my next questions, Dr. Lupini, which last year we had to consider a memorandum of understanding through the CBA because of changes in synchronous learning and online learning. What do we anticipate? Do we anticipate being able to get everybody on board with teaching online, or are there challenges we anticipate facing with the new MOU?
Gee, thanks for the softball there, Mr. Unjust. I appreciate that. I anticipate, based on the conversations I've had with leadership, that we would be able to, that we'll have great conversations. We've had great conversations since over the summer about these different models. They were involved in the process. And I believe, in terms of, because what we haven't talked about here, we've talked about totally the teaching and learning. We haven't talked about the working condition elements of that memorandum of agreement. But I believe we'll be able to strike an agreement. We largely agree on the issues that we've put forward here and that we've been discussing with them. So I don't see that as a significant challenge.
Well, I'm glad. And so I'm really glad, because it sounds like we made a lot of progress from when we were in crisis mode last year. That's the case. That's wonderful. Two other quick questions, if I may. One is, how will we maximize the resources of our really talented PA staff under the new enriched virtual model?
Under what staff?
PA staff, our EAs.
Oh, okay. Caroline, you want to speak to that?
Sure. So EAs will be supporting kids. Trying to think where to step into that. So it will start with a schedule. So with the virtual learning model, it would start with the regular ed schedule, and then we're just starting to talk about this. We need to see what's approved, but as far as how special educators then create their specialized instruction. So it could be the case that, you know, students are in their classes with regular ed, and then special ed teachers are co-teaching with regular ed teachers. And then, you know, depending on what the IEP services are for our special ed EAs, then they would have scheduled time to work with kids too. So it's an extension. It could be the case that the special ed teachers communicate with the parents, hearing about how a student might need additional support. Sometimes the EAs then have additional time with kids for, you know, support on whether it's a lesson or a unit where they need more support, or just to work on those IEP goals where they need to make progress. But they are certainly part of the plan for sure.
And then my very last question, if I may, permanent substitutes. I know you mentioned this a little bit, but can you share a little bit more about whether we have a need, kind of either at a district level or across the SAU, to hire permanent subs to anticipate FMLA or other needs from our teachers, support our teachers?
So the permanent sub issue is, first of all, the entire substitute issue. Maybe we needed a couple more slides. But the entire substitute issue is an issue. In terms of the availability of substitutes, we've been doing a lot of work. You saw in an early version of this plan the number we thought we had available to us last summer. Earlier in the summer, that number has dwindled considerably. It's a concern to us when we have people out, whether we're going to have adequate coverage. The permanent substitute the permanent substitute issue has its own problems in terms of benefits and those issues that we've been continuing to try to talk with our negotiating council about, to see if there are ways to work with that. We haven't identified it yet, but we're not finished with those conversations. But it is a very difficult conversation. So Heidi, I see your question, so I'll just jump in. Much less necessary in a virtual environment. So we didn't use subs except on a permanent basis at all in the spring. Where we had a teacher who was out on a maternity or something like that, we might have had a sub, but not, we didn't use daily subs at all. We had very few occasions when we even would have needed one. And I anticipate that might be the same, except, you know, in certain circumstances that we'd have to work with.
So if we don't have subs just again, to make sure that we can communicate appropriately and at the right time to parents and families. If we don't have subs and we have folks that need to be out, right? I mean, it's okay for folks to be out, safety and health first.
We have a problem.
And we need to be able to communicate what that plan is as far as what we expect families to do.
Yes.
Because it's not a when.
Yes.
Right?
Entirely agree with you, and that's still an issue we're working on. As I said, this is not and you all know this, this is not a complete plan.
Yep, got it. Thank you.
Mhm.
I just wanted to quickly look back at the middle school, sample middle school schedule. This looks to me like from 8 to 9:50, kids would be on some sort of Zoom meeting. So
It's a sample because we were asked to try to start to produce schedules. I wouldn't call this a final schedule, but again, we were asked in the spring because there weren't schedules in a lot of buildings because it was emergency. So I don't think it's helpful to sit here and pick that schedule apart.
Okay.
It's an example.
I understand. I just want to say that I have the luxury of I work from home. I have a small business, so I can give a lot of attention to my kids. And that's not something that a lot of people can do with their other jobs. And getting a 5th grader, a 6th grader to sit for more than an hour, even listening, getting adults to sit here for a couple hours to listen to a 2-hour meeting is difficult. And even with all these
presentation, sorry. Sorry.
Even with all of these wonderful, check marks that we're trying to hit on the side, that we're going to still do assessments and we're still going to put grades in, and we're going to try to get some one-on-one time. I can't see voting and allowing.
Aaron, what Dr. Hobbs said was not what you just said. So what Dr. Hobbs said is within some block of time, like in a classroom, that what you just described is not what would be occurring even in a classroom, right? There are opportunities for small groups. There are opportunities for asynchronous work. There are opportunities for the teacher to talk with students individually or collectively. That's what we're trying to replicate. He's merely providing a model of a schedule and what that block of time that they may have together. Because one of the things that we were asked, I'll give you an example at the high school, some teachers scheduled blocks of time. I'm teaching a math class, you're teaching an English class, and they scheduled them the same time, and a child would say, I can't be at both.
Yes, I understand that.
Schedule. So what we're trying to do is provide blocks of time when we say, for this class, this is yours, right? Which is really what we think is one of the learnings of that experience. That time will not all be used. I understand what you're talking about. I just taught a graduate class that was blocked out for 5 hours a day.
I understand, but there's a bullet here saying lab demonstrations. I taught middle school science. There's no way I could teach on a computer and expect my students, even if they could pick up supplies, to perform these things at home by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I can't sit here and support something like this for students that I know in our school. 70% of our kids want to go back. And I'm unable to support something.
I understand what kids want, and I understand what parents want. I've read the survey data as well. Right?
Well,
I'm merely laying out for you in our work through this in terms of looking at those data and other data. It's why I said early on, parents wanting their kids to go back is not the only element that we have to consider in this plan. It is an important element. And by the way, everybody sitting here in a principalship or at the central office wants kids back in buildings 5 days a week as well. Okay?
I understand.
Well,
I do understand, but I know you guys are trying your hardest, and there's so much work that has been put into this. I can't support not sending my child to school and going virtual.
Support your position. It's just not funded in science, and considering what the kids want, is great, but you know what? My kid would love to have a Lamborghini. Isn't happening.
I need to say, listen, this is our best thinking, and you can obviously, as has been done in some other parts of the state, you can reject our recommendations. There are certain things that you're going to ask me to do that I can't do, that I won't do.
So Bill, can I just kind of come back, because I think I'm sort of where Jim is as well, is that there's, because all districts are kind of baked into this conversation, and I have more questions about our district specifically that I'm sure that I can answer, but I don't want to spend 2 more hours just on Northampton here. Is there a way that we can get into our meetings? I know we have one tomorrow. It sounded like there's another one tomorrow where we can kind of vet out and ask some of these questions. And if a larger vote around Winnicott, which we're part of making up that joint board, needs to be taken tonight, I could vote on that more comfortably as a group. But when it comes down to my district, I still have too many questions that I'd like some clarification and answers on before I can ask.
If that's the board's pleasure, that's what you can do. I mean, I will say, if we're going to wait till the 18th for the final board to vote on this, we're not going to be able to implement anything, if that's what we're going to do.
I just struggle with why we would need to wait till the 18th, Bill.
Because I have a board meeting in Winnicott on the 18th right now.
And I would encourage the Winnicott board to schedule something much sooner, which I think, given the circumstances, would be very reasonable. I'm not on that board, but I would imagine that they make some accommodations.
May I also pipe in and say something? So personally, I have children that will be going to school because they're in Seabrook Elementary. They're only 9. But I also have children that are 23 in college. And I think a lot of what the parents that have children in the middle school and high school might struggle with is, obviously they're going to have to be outside the home to work. And they're probably a little bit afraid that their children are going to get lost between the tracks. I mean, you can do your best as a parent, but if you have to be, you can't be in 2 places at once. And as a parent, it is our responsibility, but at the same time, what happens to the students that don't have that support at home? I mean, what do we say to those parents who, as school board members, they call us and say, okay, so my child has to be home. I'm supposed to be at work, but I'm supposed to homeschool them. It's almost like we're failing them for an education.
So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
No one's described what we've proposed as homeschooling.
Remote learning, I'm sorry.
So, and I think Dr. Arkelian and Dr. Hobbs in particular have laid out some beginnings of the conversation of the kinds of supports, along with the kinds of supports we would provide in terms of the technology for those families. One of the other, and I should have said this to Greg's answer earlier, to Greg's question earlier, is one of the ideas behind some of the looking at grade levels was really more about kids who can be home, rather than those districts that have gone hybrid on us and put us in positions that we don't want to put parents in with respect to their young elementary kids. So that's another piece of the thinking in terms of the grade levels we've chosen, where we don't believe we can bring everyone in that building in.
This is John Bailey. Just have a couple of quick points. One, I want to thank everybody who was involved in putting these plans together. I really appreciate all the hard work. I know a lot of hard work went into it. From the perspective of trying to keep everyone happy with this plan, it's going to be impossible. It will not happen. And the level of questions that you will get from the public will be a lot more extreme than what you will get in this meeting here tonight. So I think you need to be prepared to deal with that. However, I do also think, and I think Greg was alluding to this earlier, I think we do need to vote on this tonight as a joint board. And some of us may be uncomfortable doing that, voting for another school. However, it is a SAU proposal. I think we should all vote on it. I think it's what we signed up for, whether we realized it or not, that we would have to do something like this. But I would not recommend waiting weeks to make a decision so that people who need to actually execute the plan that we're trying to do here tonight have the time to do so properly. Thanks.
Can I interject here?
Yeah, go ahead, Henry.
Thank you, Jim. I agree with you on, I'd hate to vote on something for Seabrook, your school district, or Northampton, even though I live there, in this scenario. And your question about, I would be receptive as a kind of board member to an earlier meeting. We have other board members here that can allude to that, or the superintendent tomorrow. Send something out to expedite the meeting. I would be receptive, just as a board member, to your suggestion. And but you know, we just got this, or I did about 3 o'clock this afternoon to read it. Some of you may not have got it until just now, and it affects a lot of well, it affects every school district. And I wasn't ready for a virtual at Winnicott, to be very honest with you. And just seeing it for the
Henry, you froze up.
I think Jill had a question.
Thank you. Is there flexibility following the vote tonight to discuss things in more detail and potentially have some alterations within the boundaries of the models for our individual schools?
So what I suggested at the end of the presentation is that principals would start to lay out the sort of the individual implementation as we start our discussion. Some of those will be more developed than others because some people are further along than others. And I want to reiterate one other thing. I believe, I'm not sure this will be the plan tomorrow. So I understand what you want us to do. I'm going to be really frank, and I'm going to tell you what we can't do. That's my job. And so you know, there are, as I said earlier, a number of times, there are factors within this plan that are changing by the moment on us. And we sort of set out and said, this is a big 2 weeks because of what other districts are doing and those kinds of things. And so, you know, there may be things that we've proposed here that are not going to be possible. And our pledge is to come back and tell you, and within the constraints of what we've said here tonight, continue to tell you why they are not. And again, what I tried to do earlier is sort of lay out the factors that go into that decision. But yes, I'm sorry, Jill, I'm going on. The answer to your question is that's one of our goals over the next 2 weeks, was to really start walking through individually with boards the particulars of what this plan looks like implemented in your school. Yes.
Okay. Thank you for that. I mean, this is a truly impossible world we're living in right now. And you guys have really just worked so hard to look at all of the different directions, recognizing all the change that's going to be coming our way. I think as school board members, we really need to think through the position that we're in and the limited time we have. And really, I mean, my kid may be playing at a beach, but I am not fully comfortable throwing all those kids back in school together. So while some of you may be ready to rush through the doors as a group, you know, there are so many precautions we need to take, as we need to think much more beyond ourselves and the broader communities and the impact we're having, you know, if we put a lot of people in rooms together. So anyhow, thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Bill, Greg Parrish, I have a question for you and possibly David. At the end of last school year with the remote learning, we talked about kids who might have fell behind. How does this plan address some of that?
Well, David, do you want to take that? I could, but you should.
Sure. Yeah, so I think one of the points that I tried to emphasize in the group of slides was the ability for this plan to actually allow us to engage in that diagnostic process a little bit more effectively. There's no way I would visualize an entirely remote diagnostic process of in terms of what gaps in learning a given student has. This plan does allow us not only to pull groups of students in to have those assessments, those diagnostics, to have those conversations, to understand what the needs are, both academically and emotionally, right, socially, but also allows us to put together and tailor flexible plans for those students to come in and receive some of the supports that they need. I think that's one of the core benefits of a model that we put on the table today.
Thank you.
Yeah.
May I say something? Mike Rapidu. Sorry if you can't see me. It's getting dark.
We can't see you.
I've been on the back to school committee. I've been at the SAU meetings. I've been listening to all of this. There's no one here, administrator, student, parent, who doesn't want the kids to go back to school. But given the reality, given the information that Bill and his staff has received as feedback, they've made an administrative decision to put this plan forward for the various school districts. And I believe that's why we originally put this new team together, was to bring us forward and be progressive on this. And I think that they've done this. So that's my 2 cents. I thank them all very much for doing this. I lose you?
No, we got you, Mike. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll give my thoughts on that. I mean, it's going to be a little bit more of the same, but it's I agree with everything you said. And I think ultimately, though, it's at the community and school board level, at the individual school, to make the decision on the recommendation. I think regarding the remote academy, my guess is, well, at least given my perspective, I fully support that. I think it's a fantastic idea, and it's a way to leverage the SAU, the entire SAU, to provide an option for parents who are uncomfortable sending their kids into a school. And I think it's a fantastic idea, and I'd fully support that and be willing to do a vote regarding that at an SAU 21 level, because it does impact every school at the SAU 21. But I think regarding the individual buildings, there's gonna be staff specific information and building specific information that the various school boards are gonna have to hear in order to make the vote. And I'm uncomfortable making the vote on behalf of other school districts without that information, which I shouldn't really be voting on anyways.
May I make a motion?
I think Henry has a question first.
Well, no, I was, Tom, if you're going to make the motion, I'll second it.
Well, you have to hear my motion first.
I'll probably second it.
I'd like to make a motion.
Curious first if comments are going to be read that are on the side. Same.
Yeah, I think that I tried.
I feel like there might be some board members that want to say something, they just aren't speaking. Instead, they're making critical comments to other board members on a side chat.
Agreed.
Right. I have tried to limit that. I've stressed over and over.
I appreciate it, Rhonda. I appreciate that.
So do they want to read them, or do you want me to read them? Because
well, I just was wondering if anybody else wanted to speak up that had something to say. Because if I needed to be quoted as what the children want, I spoke to 70% of parents wanting their children to go back. Parents who are working and feel that homeschooling, even though it's an enriched virtual learning environment, we are still at home doing it. And as a parent, I am still sitting there with my child next to them, helping to engage them, doing projects with them, doing labs with them, doing art projects with them, singing music with them. I am not being selfish. I am stating what is best for my child.
I think we may have lost somebody. Did we lose Mr. Merrill?
No, he's there. Well, maybe not.
I hope that what's being said is that what we're recommending is not considering what's best for children.
Dr. Lupini, I think Aaron was responding to some of the comments in the chat, not about our conversation.
Okay.
No, I'm saying I understand everyone's here for what's best for the child. I was being accused on a personal line of stating that what I want is just for the children and that I'm being selfish.
I'm sorry.
And I would like to just let everybody know that I do have a background in microbiology. For most of our nurses at our school, I've probably taught them at UNH. I know a lot about virology. I am not someone who's just telling our kids not to wear masks and not to hand sanitize. It is extremely important to educate our children how to stay safe, but it is more important for our children to have social interactions and to be educated. And I feel like there is a line that we need to figure out where that's going to be. And I don't think being at home for certain kids is the best thing. And that's, I hope I'm clarifying what I had said earlier.
Jim, I'd like to make a motion if I may.
Sure.
I'd like to make a motion to recommend that the SAU move forward with developing the remote learning academy option, and that each board individually decide about accepting the recommendation at the board level, individual district level.
Is there a second?
I'll second. I told Tom I would. Second.
Rhonda, do you want to do a roll call? Any further discussion before we do a vote?
Can you please state your question, your motion again?
I'd like to make a motion to recommend that the SAU move forward with the developing the learning academy option, and that each district consider the recommendation of the SAU at the district level. Each board evaluate the recommendation at the district level.
And you have a second to that. Jim, can I just mention, I think Heidi had a comment or question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I did. I'm sorry. And I guess I'm just kind of reiterating lots of things that came across here, but you know, with the remote learning, it did kind of throw me off guard, because initially, of course, that's not what I would be hoping for, because for the mental health and the good of our youth, I do see the need for interaction. However, I also understand the nurses' situation, the safety of others. We may not have teachers to be able to come to school to teach our kids. So I'm understanding the bigger picture, and I'm appreciating where you're coming from on this. I guess I do think it's a good idea to maybe vote on it with individual schools, or create some plans, as you said. Even I don't know if this is for all schools or when it kind of only the small group work sessions, how we can create more of that and abilities maybe when school first goes back. I know we talked about having the freshmen go in, but I think coming off of this spring season was such a struggle for so many of our youth. If there's some way in individual schools and with school boards, we can create some type of scenario to have them in person, although remotely, because I understand the safety of that. I don't know, that's my 2 cents.
Leslie, did you have a comment? I saw you raise your hand.
Thanks, Jim. No, I knew Heidi had been trying to get in. I've been quiet through all of it tonight. I appreciate and value everybody's opinions on the board and on all of the administrators and the teams and whatnot. It's a hard one because I see both sides. I don't want to be voting on what Northampton's doing, and I don't want to be voting on what Seabrook's doing. I want to vote on what Winnicott's doing. But I understand for us to be able to move forward as a unit and as a as an SAU, we have to at least give them the tools across the board for we can fine tune them on our own boards, but for them to move forward, I don't know. I don't know how I'll vote, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm torn. Sorry.
It's fair. It's not an easy decision. I think everybody's torn, quite frankly. So, any further comments before we put the motion to vote?
I had one last question, Jim. So is the motion to, so it's basically everything that is in the presentation is on the table. As Tom rephrased the motion, though, it's sort of an option for each board to individually accept it. But the vote tonight will be to accept the options on the table, with another vote to come shortly from the district level.
Yeah, that's how, I mean, how I read how I interpreted Tom's was accepting the recommendation, but that the individual boards have to approve them at their school district level, and with the caveat being that the remote academy would be approved and would move forward.
So I want to make sure that I have this motion correct, because I feel like it's been paraphrased a couple different ways, and I just want to make sure that for the record that it's appropriate. Please correct me. I have motion to recommend that the SAU move forward with developing the remote learning academy option, and that each board evaluate their recommendation at the individual board meetings? Or was it, I feel like I missed something on that last part.
Yeah, it's really approve.
Okay.
Approve for each district individually.
Approve for each district's recommendation individually?
I'm trying to thread the needle here where the SAU can continue to do their work, but each district has the autonomy to ask additional questions and evaluate and come up with the final approval on their own. So that I'm not voting on Southampton, I'm not voting on Winnicott, I'm not voting for any other district but my own, because I've only been, that's where I was elected. So I don't know if there's, Jim, I don't know if there's a better way to word.
I think it makes perfect sense. I mean, I think there's clearly very logical and well thought out reasoning for each recommendation. And I have full faith in the SAU and the administration on why they did that. I just think they can't necessarily articulate that at each school level on this call. Yeah, in this form.
Well, some of it I can't do there. So I don't want anybody who's watching this meeting to believe that there's going to be some freer conversation about, for example, employee data, which is clearly an element, because we're talking to an individual board. That conversation is not going to be any different.
Yeah, I understand that, but you have the option to go into non-public at the specific school
Not to
level.
discuss those things, I don't.
Yeah, and I know, but you can also talk about, there's things you can get into a little more depth on than you can in this form.
So may I ask Rhonda a question before you vote on that?
Can I recommend something instead? How about, if people are agreeable, why don't we put a motion forward to accept the plan as written? If that doesn't pass, then I would default back to Tom's plan in terms of saying, okay, well, let's agree on the remote learning academy and have each individual board vote on their own. But if we actually have enough people who think that
We have a motion on the floor.
then that would pass and we would be done.
I think we actually have getting into particulars of how these things work. I think we have a motion on the floor.
Yeah.
And now we're getting into, would you do an amended motion? I don't remember how this all works, to be
I'm just
honest.
wondering, does that mean that we are not actually going to vote on the proposal that's been put forth to us tonight?
I believe if we have a motion on the floor, we can take a vote, and if that fails, then someone can propose another motion. Is that correct?
Okay.
Am I right, or?
That's right.
You can have a friendly amendment. You can have a friendly amendment on his motion.
Correct.
the motion can also be withdrawn. So those are the.
Yes.
Could be, hypothetically, right?
Right.
Hypothetically.
What are our expectations of the SAU moving forward with the current motion if it passes?
Well, can I ask a question about that? Because I would like to answer that question fully, but I have to ask Rhonda a question. May I do that, Jim?
Sure.
What's the posting notice, Rhonda, for a meeting? 48 hours?
An emergency meeting, you have to have 24-hour notice.
Yeah, they wouldn't be emergent. I don't believe this would fit the definition of an emergency meeting. Can you tell me how soon I could get a board together?
Looking at the calendar?
How soon could I get, so we have 2 boards scheduled for tomorrow night.
Correct.
Can we schedule the other, frankly, I guess I would say, can we schedule the other 3 boards for Friday? Is that possible? Or does it have to be Monday or Saturday?
You have to have a 24-hour notice.
Okay, 24 hours. Thank you.
Just a question, why would this not be an emergency meeting? To me, this is like.
Well, I don't think it fits
the
that
epitome
criteria.
of emergency.
It's a specific criteria, and I'm not sure it fits. I'd have to look, Leslie, it may.
I think this is pretty, I mean, I'm with Leslie on this one. This seems like an emergency.
Yeah, I would want to
Situation.
check with legal counsel because I don't want somebody questioning that we've used that statute incorrectly. That's all. So I don't know. I hope you're right.
It's fair.
Rhonda, can you read the motion again as you understand it now?
What I have is a motion to recommend that the SAU move forward with developing the Remote Learning Academy option and that each board approve the individual district recommendations at the individual board meetings. Is that correct?
Yes. All right. I think we've had discussion. Can we do a roll call vote?
Just to clarify, remote learning option, that phrase contains all the options that were outlined.
The Remote Learning Academy is defined as remote learning for students and families that need it. And there are teachers that might be across the entire SAU participating in that, not necessarily from a student's district. So it was part of the second and third models that were shown.
Am I adding that to the motion?
And it's part of what goes to the SAU, kind of what has to happen SAU wide, which is why I threw it at this.
And I appreciate that motion. I really do. I'll say just practically, until I know what mode is going to be in place for each district, I don't know who to talk to about staffing it. I don't know who to offer it to. So I appreciate it. We can begin to do some background work, which is why I think we'd have to get to the point with each district in the next few days. So, I do appreciate it. Thank you.
Am I adding anything to the motion?
Nope, you're not adding anything. I think you've captured it okay. I just wanted to answer Greg's question.
Okay.
All right. Can we do the vote?
I had Tom Von Jess making this motion. Who?
Henry.
Henry.
Okay.
So can I just ask a quick question before we go?
Sure.
So we're not actually voting yes or no on whether or not we are accepting what the recommendation is for our school, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it will happen at the individual school board meeting for the respective schools.
Okay, thank you.
Rhonda, do you mind just reading it out one more time before we do the?
Absolutely. Motion to recommend that the SAU move forward with developing the Remote Learning Academy option and that each board approve the individual district recommendations at the individual board meetings.
Okay, can we do the roll call vote now?
Okay. Aaron Stanton.
Yes.
Forrest Carter.
No.
Greg Merrow. Not present. Greg Parrish.
No.
Greg Duffy.
Yes.
Henry Marsh.
No.
Jim Keim,
Yes.
John Bailey,
No.
Leslie LaFond,
Yes.
Michael Rabideau,
No.
Rebecca Burdick,
Yes.
Sharon Gordon,
Yes.
Tom Von Jess,
Yes.
Heidi Terracina,
Yes.
Jennifer Hubbard,
Yes.
Kelly Huber,
No.
Martin Tavishian,
Yes.
Nermina Peterson,
Yes.
Tony Delano, Tony, let me unmute you. Tony Delano
Yes.
and Jill Swayze.
Yes.
I have the vote recorded. I believe that we will need to do the weighted vote. That's how we do joint board votes. Depending on how many people from each board are present, because each board is entitled to a total of 3 votes. But as of individual votes, I'm showing 13 yes and 6 no, and 1 not present. I'm sorry.
Do we need to wait for the count in case we need to vote on a different motion?
Pardon?
Do we need to wait? We need to get the weighted count in before we.
I think Rhonda's
Yes.
looking at that right now. Yes.
Yeah, she's got to do some math.
Got it. Okay, thank
Sorry.
Take off your shoes, Rhonda, and count.
Yeah. Gosh, now I'm under pressure. I'll never get.
Better you than me.
Oh, boy. I apologize. I do not even have the weighted vote paperwork in front of me. Not anticipating. I'm gonna have to.
But I joined late.
Or something.
Rhonda, I can help you if you want to just do it that way. I can help you.
Yes, that would be great.
Okay,
So
so we have all 3 members of Southampton. And what was the vote among the Southampton?
Southampton was.
3-0? 3-0, I believe.
Right. Time was yes.
Okay.
Rhonda, I think Jessica Brown's trying to talk. She's on the meeting, but you didn't call her, but I heard her trying to talk to you.
Jessica. Jessica, are you there?
Rhonda, yes. You didn't ask me to vote. I joined late, so I'm a little lost. So I'm going to abstain.
All right. Abstention.
So Rhonda, among those 3, it was 3-0, I believe. Can you tell me, I'll just ask you the questions and then I can do this for you quickly.
Okay.
How many Seabrook members voted? 4?
We have 5 Seabrook members voted.
No, they didn't. Jessica
Mike?
didn't vote, so,
Oh, she abstained, but but there are 5 people here.
okay.
So
So
you
the
have
4
to take
voted?
the 3 divided by 5.
What? I'm sorry?
3 votes for the 5 board members that are present,
Yes.
and you have to give a weight to each of those.
I understand how to do that. Just tell me the yeses and nos.
Okay, it's not sorted here. I have for Seabrook, Forrest Carter was a no.
Yeah. Mike was a no, and I believe there were 2 yeses.
Kelly was a no.
Oh, okay, so,
And Jennifer was yes.
okay, so it's 2.25 and 0.75. Okay, go on to Northampton, please.
Northampton, Aaron Stanton was yes.
Yeah,
Greg Duffy was yes.
I believe they were all yes.
Tom Von Jess was yes. Martin was yes, and Nermina was yes. So there's 3 votes.
Hampton Falls,
Hampton Falls, we have
4 members.
Greg Parrish was no.
Mhm,
John Bailey was no.
mhm.
Swayze was yes.
Okay,
Those are each 1 vote each.
so there are
And
only 3, 1 and 2. Okay, and then Winnicott?
Winnicott, we have Henry Marsh was no.
Mm-hmm.
Leslie LaFond was yes.
Yep.
Mike Rabideau
No.
was no.
Yep.
Heidi Terracina was yes.
Yep.
And Tony Delano was yes.
Okay, so 1.8 and 1.2. So it passes. That much I can tell you. I can give you the exact numbers in a minute, but it passes. 7.75, 9.55 to 4.25, 5.45. 9.55 to 5.45. I can give that to you later, but it passes.
All right. So as we said before, I would encourage, let's definitely check on the notification issue. And I would encourage all the boards that don't have one scheduled this week to put together a meeting in order to, vote on this at the respective districts.
What does this vote do, Dr. Lupini, moving forward for you guys in planning so that we can be open in time?
So I have 2 meetings, just thinking out loud because you asked me the question. I have 2 meetings tomorrow. I'm gonna go in tomorrow looking for 3 board meetings on Friday, probably during the day or into the evening. Because I think waiting till Monday puts us in a very much more difficult position and quite frankly, even at that, it robs a half a day of the work that we need to do. So, but we would look to put those meetings together for Friday or Saturday.
Just a reminder, we already have there's a board retreat on Friday morning that we cannot.
I'm not sure we can do that with respect to what we now need to do. I was asked the question off the top of my head. I'm not sure we can do that.
I just want to make sure that board's aware that that may have to be shifted.
Excuse me, Dr. Lupini, do we have another motion in the wind? Because that one was defeated.
No, it wasn't defeated. It passed.
No, it passed, Henry.
Oh, it passed. I'm sorry.
That's okay. It passed.
With the board members here tonight, is everyone available for a meeting on Friday that's not scheduled? I mean, we're time sensitive here, so everyone's going to have to make themselves available now who doesn't already have a board meeting scheduled. Is everyone available?
I'm available in the morning. I'm not available in the evening. Actually, I'm not available after 3 o'clock.
Yeah, we can work at that tomorrow. I appreciate it, Greg. We can work at it tomorrow. But it's gonna require some scheduling on everybody's part.
I think this is disappointing tonight. Very disappointing.
Motion to adjourn.
No,
We're not done yet.
We need to be back on the calendar.
Yeah.
No. Please, there's another agenda item, which is we made a recommendation on starting date last week. You adopted that. What we've done now is fleshed out the remainder of the calendar, including the additional professional development time for teachers. That calendar is in your materials, and we're recommending it for your approval tonight so that we can get it out to families so that they can see what the school year looks like.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions or comments on it before we get a motion?
Motion to approve the 2021 school year calendar.
I'll second.
Can we just call it revision?
Sure.
Thank you.
Motion to approve the revised 2021 school year calendar.
Thank you, Aaron.
Second.
Ready for a vote?
Yep.
Aaron Stanton,
Yes.
Forrest Carter,
Yes.
Greg Parrish,
Yes.
Greg Duffy,
Yes.
Henry Marsh. Henry Marsh,
Yes.
Jessica Brown. Jessica Brown. Are you still with us? Okay. Jim Keim,
Yes.
John Bailey,
Yes.
Leslie LaFond,
Yes.
Mike Rabideau,
Yes.
Rebecca Burdick,
Yes.
Sharon Gordon,
Yes.
Tom Von Jess,
Yes.
Heidi Terracina,
Yes.
Jennifer Hubbard,
Yes.
Kelly Huber,
Yes.
Martin Tavishian,
Yes.
Nermina Peterson,
Yes.
Tony Delano,
Yes.
and Jill Swayze.
Yes.
I have that vote recorded.
Great. And then our future meetings, which just regarding the SAU 21, there's a policy meeting on August 26th. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
I second.
Beat me, Narina.
Third.
You gotta be quicker than me.
I think we're all. Is there anybody have any issues with adjourning? Let's do a silent.
No.
Thank
you.
Thanks
Thank you
for all
very
the
much.
hard work, everyone. Thanks
Yeah,
for the long
thank
night.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Night.
Good night.
Night.